watching on HCTV. This is our first council meeting in 2005, and I want to begin this by wishing all of you and all of our citizens health, happiness, and prosperity during the coming year. We do have a full agenda. We will begin with our invocation and pledge of allegiance led by Councilmember Hutchison, and if you will, please stand.
We pray with me. Father, thank you so much for this new year. Thank you, Father, for keeping us healthy, keeping our families healthy. Thank you, Father, for keeping Haltom City citizens healthy, getting us through this 2004, and we look forward to great things in 2005. Father, we commit those to you. Thank you, Father, for our families. Thank you for this city, wonderful city. We commit this time to you. We pray for wisdom in guiding our city, Father, both citizens and council and staff. We thank you, Father, for caring about us and being sovereign. We thank you, Father, for blessing Haltom City. We lift this time up to you now. We pray that it will bring honor to everything that we do. We thank you, Father. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we move now to presentations, and we have 3 presentations to be made tonight, and Mr. Muir is going to lead us through this process.
Thank you, Mayor. First one's going to be a presentation from Randall Scott, from Randall Scott and Tony Jeffries regarding our central fire station. If you guys would come on up to the podium.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. There's a lot of new faces on here that we didn't have the opportunity to work with, a few familiar faces, but I'm Randall Scott, President and CEO of Randall Scott Architects, and this is Tony Jeffries, one of the partners at WHJ Architects. Not so many months ago, we stood in front of a selection committee and promised to deliver a landmark fire station and one in which the citizens would be proud of. Regrettably, today we're here to provide you with second place National Design Award for your fire station, but the first place fire station in the National Design Award just happened to be from the city that the design awards were based in, and a fairly ordinary looking station. So with that said, the thing that I had said when we interviewed for the project, having grown up in this area, is I just wanted to give back to the community that gifted me with the skills to become an architect and provide a great piece of architecture for the city. And I think in that light, and the work that Tony's firm and our firm have done, the city has a building that they can be proud of. And I think it is really the vision of Calvin, Mayor White, and Tom, and Fire Chief McIntyre, that this building is here and something you need to be proud of. Having grown up in this area, I think it is truly one of the landmark buildings in this area. And we were very pleased to be a part of it. And if there's anything we can do to help you on other projects, we'd appreciate that opportunity. Mayor?
To come out in second place is quite an accomplishment within itself. There's a lot of fire stations being built across the nation, and for you and your staff to have designed this fire station that continues to be just so impressive to people in this whole area, our hats are off to you, and thank you for bringing this kind of product to our city, Mr. Scott, both of you. And it's with great pride I accept this on behalf of the city, and I expect Chief McIntyre has a special place for this to be displayed. So again, thank you, gentlemen.
we have Chief Burton. Chief Burton's going to be going over some police department initiatives.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Mr. Muir. I wanted to take an opportunity to tell you about a few things that are going on in the police department. Some of them have been in the media and some of you know about, but I wanted a chance to tell the citizens directly. One of the most recent, in December, we successfully interfaced with the Texas Department of Public Safety, AFIS, which is their automated fingerprint identification system. And we also interfaced with the FBI's system. They have about 50 million prints in their database. And we can now conduct a search of latent prints developed at crime scenes in our city and potentially identify a suspect within just a matter of hours based on fingerprints alone. We're about the third department in the state of Texas to interface using a standard PC, and we're about number 12 in the country that's interfaced with the FBI database. So that's quite an accomplishment for a department our size. And as you know, we're waiting on our live scan machine that's going to be delivered, we hope sometime this year, that'll give us even more capabilities in that area. So we're excited about that. We're also pleased to announce that applications are being accepted as we speak for the Volunteers in Police Service, or VIPs. The program is designed to allow citizens the opportunity to help us in what they know best, whether it be clerical skills or filing. If you have somebody that's retired from an office environment or something, we can always use that kind of assistance. And at the same time, give back a little to them by teaching them about our department, how it operates. And we're looking forward to a lot of good relationships being developed through this program, and we're excited about it as well. Some of the areas where we plan to use citizens are training them in the ability to answer questions, say, at our front desk. So we wouldn't have to use an employee. We could put a citizen, a knowledgeable citizen there at the front desk that could answer questions for citizens. Clerical assignments, data entry, we have issues come up all the time where we need stuff entered into a computer. So that is another area where people might help. Also at special events, assisting us. I'd even go so far as to say traffic direction or just being a visible presence at some of the neighborhood events that we have. Also being coordinators with the neighborhood watch groups and things like that. There's just a bunch of things they can help us with, so we're looking forward to it. And we've already had several volunteers. Anybody interested in volunteering for that program can call the police department and we'll give them more information on it. We're also providing a new service that is called crimeweb.net, and citizens can sign on to crimeweb.net. It's based on zip code, and they sign up for information on their own zip code, or actually they can do any zip code in the country up to 5, I believe. And they can get information such as missing child alerts or missing adult alerts, major crimes. We'll put information about major crimes on there when we're looking for suspects, and it gets the information out by internet. The way it works is the person who signed up gets an email saying Haltom City Police Department has issued a crime alert or a missing child alert, and gives them that information. Then if they view something in public that they think might help us with that case, they can give us a call, and it's very helpful. We can use it for community information alerts, homeland security alerts if we choose to pass that information on, school information. We can use it for a number of things, but we're concentrating on the crime issues first and see how it goes. So crimeweb.net is the net address, and it's very simple, about a 5-step process to get signed up, and you'll start getting information from Haltom City. We hear that other area departments are starting to sign up as well. So if you wanted something regional, if you wanted, for instance, Richland Hills, I believe, is already signed up. And if once the Northeast Tarrant County cities get signed up, you could get literally a plethora of information about what's going on in the crime world. Want to announce some good news and some bad news. The good news is that we have just recently appointed Aaron Carter, who is one of our animal services officers, to be the supervisor of that unit. He's excited about it. He's full of enthusiasm. It's bubbling over. The downside is when we promote him, we've got vacancies at the bottom. So we're having to scale back our hours for a very, very short time until he can get 2 brand new animal control officers who have already been hired up to speed, and then we'll expand the hours. The animal control shelter will be open for adoptions from 4:30 to 6. And I want folks to know that's not our desire, but there is so much field work for these youngsters I say youngsters, they're all younger than me, to go out there and do and respond to these calls for animal services out there in the field, that it is the best we can do at the present time and still take good care of the animals. Recent reorganization in CID, you know about a little bit of it. We talked about the sex offenders. In evaluating our crimes in Haltom City, we also discovered we have a need for a detective assigned strictly to juveniles. We decided to go ahead and bite the bullet and pull a detective loose from the CID unit and assign them just to juveniles. It goes a lot smoother when that's all they have to work because it's a different system. They can just work juvenile cases. We have, I think, more than our share of runaways, and we're making a valiant effort to try to recover those kids short term rather than letting them stay gone 2 or 3, 4 days at a time. We're looking at the causes, the root causes of those problems, and we're going to try to address it from that perspective as well. But first, we needed to get somebody in there that could really get a handle on what we're dealing with here. And unfortunately, the same goes with domestic violence. Haltom City has a significant number of domestic assaults each month, as evidenced by the crime report that I give to the city manager, and I'm sure he passes on to you. We've also assigned a detective to domestic crimes. What we've asked them to do is develop relationships with the resources throughout the county, such as the women's shelter. We are hoping to be able to identify and apply for some VOCA grants, which is Victims of Crime Assistance, that are dedicated specifically to domestic violence victims. And I hate to say, it's not always the guys. Sometimes it's the reverse, but 99% of the time it is the male that is the violent party in these things, and we want to get a handle on that. It is one of the most difficult things for police officers to address because it happens in the home. It's not out where we can see it. So we're making some efforts in that area. And I want to tell you one last initiative that we initiated last year that I think is finally showing some results. Last year I asked our traffic officers to take a little bit less random approach to their traffic enforcement and try what I call a results-based approach. I asked them to analyze where accidents were occurring in our city and then address their enforcement efforts to where the accidents were occurring. Now, what that does is puts officers sometimes where, and I'll give you a good example, 820, following too closely is the biggest cause of wrecks up there. Very, very difficult, though, at 8 o'clock in the morning to work that area up there on a motorcycle or anything else. But they've tried it. They thought I was crazy, but they've tried it. And they're not working the areas where the citations are easy or plentiful. And they've also taken an approach that when they stop a violator, the intent is to be corrective, correct the driving behavior rather than being punitive. So I'm saying you don't have to write one violator 5 tickets. It doesn't make us any friends. I'd rather you write them a speeding ticket and warn them on a couple of other violations, and they're more likely to take care of the citation than rather it go into warrant and then we house them in the jail. So we're kind of coming in the back door there and hoping this is going to work out for us. So they're analyzing these traffic accidents. They discovered on their own, or kind of made up some things on their own, some things they call ARPs, and that's accident reduction programs. They take the top 10 accident locations in Haltom City, and that's where they concentrate their efforts. They try to find out why the accidents are occurring, whether it's speed or following too closely or running a red light or running stop signs, and then they try to write citations for that violation. And they also have something they call CDCs, and that's citizen-directed complaints. Anytime a citizen calls one of you or calls one of us and says people are running the stop sign near my home, we assign officers to respond to that. Sometimes it's education of the citizen. We've had a case where we went out and we showed the citizen that people weren't going as fast as they thought they were when we showed them how the radar gun worked. It looks faster to them sometimes than they're really moving. I say all that to say this, that in 2004, accidents in Haltom City were down 4%. So maybe we're on to something. We're going to keep trying, and that's about it. I just wanted to bring you an update on a few things. I'll answer any questions some of you may have.
Members of the council, any questions, comments for the chief?
Yes,
Yeah,
Mayor,
please.
I just want to say thank you. That's excellent effort.
Well,
And the
it's-
citizens and this council appreciates it.
Well, it's
Hopefully-
66 folks out there that are all working in the same direction. I'm real proud of them, too.
We appreciate the things we heard tonight. Sounds like good things are happening.
Okay, thank you.
Next up is going to be James Pliska. He's going to be updating you on Operation Clean Sweep.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Tom, your Mayor, members of the council, citizens of Haltom City. Haltom City Clean Sweep continues into 2005. Clean Sweep is a city-initiated, inspector-driven code enforcement program that was first brought to you in the budget year of 2004, and we are continuing it into 2005. We're now working on our 4th district of the city for this program. This 4th district is south of Broadway to 28th Street and extends west from Beach Street to East Ridge Drive. And this is one of our largest areas for this program. City inspectors will be identifying code violations which are in public view. As the city inspectors enter into these areas, they have GIS pre-printed computerized forms in which list the houses down the street, and they're able to go down the street and record what they see within public view. The code violations that they'll be looking for will include the following: junk, trash, and debris. This is an accumulative item that we look for that includes large amounts of rubbish, brush, or any other objectionable, unsightly, or unsanitary matter. It also includes refuse, appliances, worn out or wrecked or dismantled machinery, and different types of construction materials. We also look for junk vehicles. This is where it becomes multi-departmental. The police department has helped us on this. When we find junk vehicles in the street, the police department works with us on this. We take care of the junk vehicles that are on private property. But I'd like to explain to you what a junk vehicle is. It's any vehicle that is not currently tagged or inspected and not necessarily wrecked, dismantled, or inoperable. Simply, if it has expired tags or inspection sticker, according to our ordinance, that is a junk vehicle. Sometimes people take that as an offense, but unfortunately, the state law and our ordinance recognizes that if that vehicle is not legally operable on the street, it is referred to as such. We also look for high grass, not so much at this time, but this spring. Parking on unapproved surfaces. Again, our ordinance requires that, particularly in residential areas, that you park only on concrete or asphalt, particularly in times of the winter and the early springs when we have our wet season. This does present a problem and does affect your neighbors if this were to continue. We also look for trees, tree limbs that overhang the street that prevent or propose a safety hazard. Part of the Clean Sweep 2005 includes the Dumpster Day. We're working with public information. If you recall, Dumpster Day is a free service provided by the Beautification Committee and public information, as well as the city, for residents to come by and drop off their items when they're cleaning out their garage or they're cleaning out their backyard. And that Dumpster Day has been picked for Saturday, April the 23rd from 9 to 1 p.m. Including in our Clean Sweep program is our substandard building program. On your monitor tonight, and the people can see this at home, we're going to be showing you the destruction of a house located at 2320 Fincher. This occurred this past Friday. This house was found to be substandard and a hazard to the public, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood. It was heard by our housing board last year and was set for demolition of the 20th of December. We gave it an additional month for any type of activity to occur from the property owner. None took place, therefore this house was destroyed. And again, we want to thank the Public Works Department for their aid and their successful destruction of this house. We have 5 more pending before the board. We'll have another one come up January the 20th. This will be on Kings Avenue. And again, we'll be working towards 5 to 10 of these a year.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Pliska. I appreciate that report. I think beautification, revitalization, bringing things up to code are issues very important, and particularly if we're going to raise the bar in Haltom City and and make improvements, we have to have the things like what Operation Clean Sweep does. And I really appreciate the focus of Clean Sweep in the sense that it's not to just go out and write tickets and give people grief. It's an educational process to help the people mitigate the problems they have on their property. Any comments by any member of the council regarding this? Okay, we move then to the announcements and the events. Mr. Muir, you want to introduce this?
Our
for us,
Public
please?
Information Coordinator, Fran Burns, has got a few announcements to make.
Thank you very much. I have 3 things I'd like to share information with everyone about. First of all, a blood drive will take place here in the City Hall parking lot on January the 18th from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. It's being coordinated by Charles Langham of the Fire Department. It's open to all employees first, but of course the public can come and give blood during that time. All donors will be given T-shirts, so hope we'll have a good turnout for that. Second thing is our tree recycling program. You might have noticed the pile of trees next to the McDonald's on Belknap Street. This is an annual activity. We ask the public to drop off their real Christmas trees, and the Public Works comes in and mulches the trees and offers the mulch to the residents to use in their yards. As I say, yesterday was the last day to drop off trees. If somebody still has a tree, they will give them until Wednesday. But after that, no more trees, please. And the material, the mulch material will stay there through next weekend, and then that will be cleaned off as well. So please come by and get some of that as well. Also, the last thing is, I hope everyone has had a chance to look at and pick up the new Haltom City Community Calendar for 2005. The artwork in the calendar is a result of our photo contest 2004, and we've gotten lots of really nice compliments about the calendar and the photos. And the reason I mention the calendar is because we're not mailing them to people. We're asking them to come to all of our municipal buildings, have them available to come by and pick them up. And, of course, they're free. And I wanted to tell you that since this has been a success this year, that we'll probably do the same thing for 2006. So if you're interested in trying for a shot at the calendar, having your work included in the calendar, enter the photo contest for 2005. The deadline is January 28th. That's about 3 weeks away. Guidelines are available at the library and here at City Hall. There's also prize money available, and the best of show, which it has to be a photograph taken in Haltom City, wins $175, so it's a pretty good deal. So if you have any questions about any of the activities I've mentioned, on the back of the calendar are phone numbers for all of our departments and for me. So please pick one up and call us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Burns. We appreciate the information you brought tonight and that you continue to bring before the council and the citizens of Haltom City to keep us abreast of some of the good things going on in Haltom City. We move now to item number 1 on the agenda, the November monthly financial report, and I believe our finance director, Mr. Joel Welch, is prepared to make that report.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council members. In your packet, agenda item number 1 is the monthly financial report for the fiscal year through November 30th of 2004, the first 2 months of the fiscal year. As has become the practice of the finance department, we do include an executive summary on pages 1 through 4 of the report. We also provide then the budget statements beginning on page 5, the sales tax analyses on page 11, and then the investment report for the city's investment portfolio begins on page 16. In terms of some of the more notable observations that I'd like to make, begin with the general fund. That's the statement that's on page 5. I would note that property taxes thus far this year are at 7.7% of the budget. This is normal for collections of property taxes in a Texas city. I would say that we're slightly ahead of last year's pace. At this same point last year, we had collected about 7.5% of the levy. But as property taxes are not actually due, or the last due date is January 31st before late penalties attach, most of the time property taxes aren't paid until more in December and then mostly in January. So that's when we'll see most of the revenue come in for the property taxes, and you'll see the percentage of the budget of payment increase from the 7.7% now to somewhere in the range of about 75 to 80%, and then progress on for the balance of the year. Sales taxes are slightly better than we expect for this time of year. We're at about 20% of the budget. Last year at this point, we were at about 19.8%. So we're just a smidgen, that's a financial term, higher than last year. I would also point out that the collections year to date are about 10.6% higher than for the same 2 months of last year. So in fact, we're off to a fairly good start in terms of economic activity in our business community. We're really hoping to see it continue. Of course, the payment that we get in February is going to be the real bellwether for our economic health. That's the one that includes Christmas. And I'll let you know on that as soon as possibly can. I will also mention that in the area of consumption taxes, we have not yet received a quarterly payment that includes the impact of the approved beer and wine sales for the city, but the next quarterly payment that we'll be receiving on that should be coming in on the 21st of January, and that will cover the fourth quarter, and we'll be watching to see if there's any impact that's begun to show up there. And again, I'll keep the council apprised on the progress in that particular sales tax. Expenditures so far this year are at about 15% of the budget. That is, by this time of year, if you just straight line the budget, we would be at 16.7%. We're at about 15%. So far, everyone is being faithful stewards of their budget allocations, and I don't really have any particular areas of concern to report in the general fund. Revenues thus far this year are short of expenditures by about $443,000. Again, that is to be expected at this point, with property taxes not coming in until January. That's why we maintain a healthy fund balance in the general fund, is to carry us through until the property taxes kick in. In the water and sewer fund, which is on page 6, sales at November 30 are pretty much on track with the budget. That is a good thing. The year 2004 was a very wet year. I heard on the news that it was approximately the 5th wettest on recorded history. And so, we've kept a very close eye on that with the water revenues. But as I mentioned, so far we are tracking pretty close to budget on the water and sewer fees. Expenses thus far this year in the water and sewer fund are well below budget at this point. That is a good thing. That's pretty much where we should be. There has been no expenditures in the debt service area in that the water and sewer fund yet. That will occur on February 1st. But so far the fund has generated easily sufficient revenues to take care of the debt service that's going to be occurring by February 1st. The only thing I would note there is the construction division looks to be spending faster than you would expect, but that is due to the purchase of their annual capital requirements. And since those have already been ordered and the funds encumbered, it looks like it's faster. As the year progresses, that it'll come back into line. So it's not going to be a problem. Something to look forward to in the future. Right now, the drainage utility is being reported on page 10 with the other funds, so there's not a lot of detail. We are going to be pulling the drainage utility off of page 10, giving it its own page so that it'll reflect the budget that the council approved at the last meeting, and you'll actually be able to see it in an operational viewpoint, and we'll be doing that, should be starting next month. The investment report, as I mentioned, it begins on page 16. As of November 30th, the total portfolio is $21.7 million. Our average yield at this point has increased to 1.96%. A lot of the reason it's at 1.96%, even though most of our investment pools have now exceeded 2%, on overnight money we're earning 2% on that now, is due to the fact that some of our older investments, which are about to mature, are at very low yields. We had 2 maturities in December, one of which was at, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, at 1.45%, the other at 1.75%. These are going to be reinvested at better yields. We have another maturity that will be coming up this month that is also a sub 2%, and when we go to invest these funds, we're going to be getting a much better rate. At this point, 59% of the portfolio is invested in very short-term instruments, primarily in the investment pools. And as I have mentioned in a previous meeting, we are still working toward a goal of having more invest in a fixed time period, but still maintaining a good liquid reserve for any unforeseen contingencies. I would mention, I'd mentioned this just a moment ago about the interest rates. I was going to give you an example of which. I got an email today from one of our investment brokers, and it stated that the yield on the TechStar investment pool is at 2.1963%, and TexPool is at 2.2142%. When I came on board 9 months ago, those rates were about a full percentage point less. So our investments are doing much better than they were as the market has really finally started to come around a little bit and give us a chance to earn some money.
Questions or comments for Mr. Welch? Councilmember Sutton?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Appreciate this report. It is an excellent report that I highly recommend citizens look into because it really gives a detailed view of where the money is going. One thing, Joel, that I had a little trouble with on page 16 here with the investment report. Is it possible that these investment composition funds like the mutual fund, government agency, CD TexPool, so forth, can carry on? That naming convention can be for where you break out all the individual investments and use those headers or those terms on the following pages so that it's a little bit easier to identify where those individual investment funds are in the pie on page 10, or 16, I mean?
Let me make sure I understand what you're asking. The box above the graph.
Right.
You would like for the graph to reflect the same information as the box, and that the box kind of serve as a legend for the graph?
Well, no. When I look at the detailed pages, 17 through whatever, I have a hard time correlating these individual funds with where they fit on the categories that are presented on the pie.
Let me
I
restate
see
it.
what you mean. I see
Yeah.
what you mean. Yes.
Could we do a better job of doing that? Or-
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We most
Okay.
certainly can. It wouldn't be that difficult at all.
Excellent.
And it'll show up on the next report.
Thank you. All right.
Anything else? I need a motion, if I could at this time, for approval of the financial report. Councilmember Hutchison?
Make a motion that we approve the financial report as presented by Mr. Welch.
Councilmember Lanford?
That's a second.
Have a motion and a second to approve. If you will register your vote, we'll display it at this time. And that passes by unanimous vote. We move now to the consent agenda, and I might just mention that in the course of the council conducting its business each month, there are items that are considered to be routine, self-explanatory, and items number 2 through 9 on our agenda tonight fits into that category. We place those on the consent agenda, and they will be enacted by the council with one motion. And approval of the consent agenda authorizes the city manager to implement each item in accordance with staff or board recommendations. So I'm ready for a motion regarding items 2 through 9. I do want to mention, for the benefit of the audience and as a reminder to the council, that after I have a motion and a second, there will be some discussion on the Homeland Security item number 7 before the vote is taken. Councilmember Sutton, I believe you had your light on first.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to make a move that we approve the consent agenda with the change in the minutes that was talked about in pre-council.
Okay, have a motion. Councilmember Holcomb?
I'll second that.
Have a motion and a second to approve. Mr. Muir, I think we want to talk a little bit about item number 7.
Sure. For those in the audience and at home, item number 7 is seeking authorization to purchase radio communication equipment. The city was awarded a Homeland Security grant in the amount of $148,041. And what we're going to be doing with it is upgrading our radio system from the police and fire side to upgrade the 800 megahertz radio system to allow them to better communicate and also better communicate with other agencies. We wanted to bring this out, at least to the public. I think publicly there's been a lot of speculation on the news reports about some of these grant funds that have not been spent properly. I wanted to assure the citizens that this purchase is a proper purchase. It can stand up to the scrutiny of any inquiry or any audit from Homeland Security or any other federal agency as far as being a qualified buy. Again, the grant is for $148,041. We're looking to spend $119,745, the balance of which is about $28,000, and we'll be buying more radio equipment with that money. But some other things kind of have to fall into place first, and we'll be coming back to the council with that authorization. But that's what's before you tonight. And while changing the subject, one of the items on your on the consent agenda are let me see, items 8 and 9 regarding Atmos Gas. Our rep Marilyn Ackman is present. If any of y'all would like to talk with her, I don't think Marilyn's got anything she's wanting to say. Is that right? Okay. But did want to point out that she is here. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the consent agenda. You've heard the comments made by Mr. Muir, our city manager. Any members of the council wish to add to those comments before I call for the vote? Okay, there being none, if you will register your vote at this time. And it passes by unanimous vote. We move then to the public hearings and ordinance section of the agenda. And it's been about a month since we have last met, and we have 7 items. And this may take us a little while, but we want to go ahead and begin the proceeding. At a point along the way, and I'm not sure just when, if we go a little bit longer than some of us are comfortable with, we may need to take a recess so members of the council can get up and stretch just a little bit. But we move now to item number 10. And Mr. Muir, you want to introduce this for us?
Sure. What you have before you is an ordinance to authorize the issuance of $5 million of certificates of obligation, $3 million of which will be off the newly created stormwater utility, $2 million will be off the water and sewer system. We have our financial advisor, Mark McCliney, here to brief the council and the citizens on the specific action that you are about to undertake. Mark.
Thank you. Mayor and council, I handed out in pre-council a pricing summary. This is the last final action that we're going to, official action that we're going to take issuing these certificates of obligation. We started this in the budget process, went on last month and issued a notice of intention to authorize $5 million worth of certificates of obligation, and now we're going to formally adopt the ordinance. What we've done most recently is we've actually priced the securities as of last Thursday. The purchasers, Samco Capital Markets and First Southwest Company, are holding their bid for your approval tonight. They priced it Thursday in anticipation of a jobs report that came out Friday, and we wanted them to do that so the fluctuation in the market wouldn't affect us if the report came out Friday unattractive. The interest rate, the average interest rate on the obligations are 4.28%. As I was saying in pre-council, very attractive rates. Joel touched on a little bit about the higher return on some of your short-term investments. Well, that hurts us a little bit on the bonds on the front end. As you all are earning a little more money, cost of borrowing is going up slightly. But where the majority of the average is on an average life bonds is on the back end, it's staying very low. So interest rates in the low 4s is very, very attractive. The rating agency, or the process with the rating agencies, went extremely well. We sold bonds in the summer. gave them information that we thought we were going to end up the year, and we actually ended up in a much more attractive position. And so we just continue to build credibility with the rating agencies and the outside buyers, the buyers of the bonds and mutual funds. So it went extremely well. Be my recommendation for you all to accept the 4.28%. And as I continue working with you all, I'm just proud as can be of the acceptance that your all's obligations are in the open market, and how easy it is to work with staff, to the rating agencies and insurance companies, and it just goes very, very smoothly. So it went very well, and here to answer any questions that you all might have.
Thank you, Mr. McCliney. I don't believe there are any questions to be asked. I want to point out for the information of the people in the audience who might have an agenda before you, it indicates this is a first reading. This is the first and only reading that we will have regarding this ordinance. So there being no questions, no comments at this time, I am ready to receive a motion regarding the wishes of the council on item number 10. Councilmember Lanford.
Move to approve ordinance 2005-00703.
Councilmember Sutton.
That's for a second, Mayor.
Yes.
Mayor, again, although no public hearing is required by state law for this ordinance, we did post it as a public hearing, so I think it would be prudent if we asked if anybody was wanting to speak on this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. I will open the public hearing at this time. If any member of the audience wishes to make comments for or against the ordinance that is before us. Okay, we have none, and so I will close the public hearing at this time. We have a motion, and we'll let that stand as stated. I've called for a second. Councilmember Sutton?
Yes, that is for a second.
I have a second. Councilmember Hutchison?
Yes, that was for a second, and to remind you that this was a public hearing, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion to approve? Okay, if you'll register your votes. And that passes by a unanimous vote. Item number 11 is the masonry ordinance. This is a second reading, and our planning director, Mr. James Pliska, will present this item at this time.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, citizens of Haltom City. This is amendment actually in the form of two ordinances as discussed at the prior council meeting to modify the masonry ordinance, which would increase the number of masonry corridors in the city and or require masonry construction within all commercial zoning districts that are required to have masonry on new and remodeled construction. In addition, these two ordinances also have the 25% non-conforming section in which an applicant can go to staff and expand a non-conforming structure with the passage of this ordinance up to 25%. Anything in excess of 25% would come before council in the form of a variance. That variance language, the new variance language, is discussed in the last meeting as well and was prepared by Mr. Olson's office, is also in both ordinances. In addition, finally, both ordinances increase the amount of masonry required from 65% to 80% for new and remodeled construction. I've also given council an informative memo to Mr. Tom Muir, the city manager, including the ordinance requirements for masonry in our surrounding cities. Therefore, I formally submit these two ordinances for discussion and approval of one. They're both going to have the same numbers. Ordinance 2004-023-15, the draft using the specific areas or the corridors listed in the primary ordinance. And those corridors included thoroughfares that bisect the city entirely, with exception of Fossil Vista and Fossil Creek Boulevard. Again, the second draft we are submitting at council's request was to utilize the masonry requirements in commercial and heavy industrial districts throughout the city. Therefore, I formally submit both ordinances and informative information about neighboring cities for your discussion and/or approval.
Members of the council, any questions for Mr. Pliska before I open the public hearing? Okay, I think there aren't. Mr. Pliska, thank you. I'll open the public hearing at this time, and this will give members of the audience an opportunity to speak for or against this proposed masonry ordinance. We have one speaker's request card filled out, and it is not necessary on a public hearing to fill one of these out, but it's okay to do so. Ms. Patricia Conley will give you the opportunity first to address the council. If you will, give us your name and address for the record, and you have 6 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Patricia Conley. I reside at 3913 Kirby Street, Haltom City. And I'm against the 80, I don't know, last time we met, I heard 85%, but 80% of it. It's an unnecessary thing for businesses to have the expense, I think, of that. We're trying to attract people from businesses to come into the town so we'd have more revenue, as far as I understand what you've been trying to do. And it seems to me that if you put all these tax things on these people of having an ordinance, if they can't have a building to just be put up, and, you know, they said at masonry, they told me that earlier that it could not be not brick. I mean, they have some beautiful steel buildings that have some frontage on the things that are not masonry, but that look masonry. And they have the beautiful part of it, because I just typed in steel buildings on Google and come up with some beautiful buildings of churches and businesses and stuff. And they didn't necessarily have to have a good look of masonry. And the masonry itself costs more. And people aren't going to want to put out that if they're going to do a building. They want a prefab building or a steel building, which is a less amount of money for them to build and stuff. And I think you'd be doing it wrong to pass it, because not only would it be not helping the city make money, but it would not be helping the people. If they decide to go somewhere else to build their buildings, that would take jobs away that could be possibly for people here in town. And we're taxed enough. I'm paying everybody's taxes, and everybody else is paying everybody for the water that you just decided to put on us without even giving us a say-so. We're chosen. We're not. What it is there's so much to do with us paying more and more to support this town. And if you don't get jobs in here to support, or businesses in here to support the town, it will not help it. And I am against putting this ordinance out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Conley. And Mr. Pliska, could I get you to address an issue Ms. Conley raised about the stone or rock facade on a metal building? Does that conform with the intent of this ordinance? If one erected a metal building and then put a stone facade, does that?
Yes, Mayor, a metal building can have a stone facade if those construction materials of the facade meet the masonry requirements in the ordinance. And many are in town. Many people don't realize, they think it's a masonry building, but in essence, it is a stone facade over a metal building.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Conley. Members of the council, any questions or comments at this point? Okay, anyone else in the audience wish to address the council at this time regarding the second reading of the masonry ordinance? Mr. Watkins?
Bob Watkins, 6140 Blue Spruce Circle. I appreciate a citizen saying what I've been saying that's happening to the business owners. I'm here to read a statement by Roy Sullins. I know he has several buildings in Haltom City. I haven't got the address on any of them. His wife's in the hospital, and I was handed this. I've read through it once, so it's not saying anything real bad about anybody, but I don't know what it said exactly. So at the end, I may say what I noticed there was one or two things in here that were not exactly correct. Tonight, you're going to make some decisions as to the mandatory use of masonry outside walls on future buildings built within your city. I have been told that you're considering requiring as much as 90% of the exterior walls to be constructed with some type of masonry material, and that you may make this a requirement for all future buildings on all streets in your city. You may be thinking that if you require all future buildings to be constructed with some type of masonry material, then your city will be more attractive and more investors will want to build here. There is no doubt that masonry walled buildings can, in some cases, and maybe in most cases, can be better looking than a metal walled building. But as you look at the photos of masonry walled buildings in your city, you will see that just because the outside of the buildings are masonry, the buildings themselves are not necessarily more attractive. By the way, you each have a copy of that, and I think they furnished you with pictures. A lot of those are empty buildings that are up and down the street. I agree that requiring future buildings on some streets to have percentage of their outside walls to be constructed with some type of masonry would be a good decision. I believe requiring the outside walls to be 90% masonry is too much. I also believe that to require this percentage to be mandatory in every future case of a side or back wall will be a mistake. What if most of the buildings on the street already have metal-sided walls and the owner wants to add on to his building? Are you going to make his use masonry on these add-on walls? Do you think it would make the building look that much better? What if the back of the building faces a creek or a railroad? If no one can see the back wall, then why require masonry? To make this masonry requirement to be mandatory for all streets will be a terrible mistake. It will stop and/or prolong the development of a large part of your city. Take a street like Moneta and Delante. To have masonry requirements on these streets and many more streets like them will kill future development. I ask that the masonry requirements be no more than 65%. This is in capital letters. I ask that you make masonry a requirement of some streets, but not all streets. I ask that you make some type of adjustment for back or side walls that no one can see. I ask that you make some type of adjustment for building add-ons. I ask that you give staff the right to make some of these future decisions and that you not tie their hands. In the past 5 years, I have added approximately $550,000 to the city's property tax base. I am responsible for other investors who have added approximately $500,000 to the city's property tax base. These buildings have added at least $2 million of taxable sales. If all streets are included in this requirement, I do not believe that I will be a future investor. Various and sundry things that various and sundry councils have done over the years have driven some what I would consider good investors out of the city. They're no longer investing in our city. And I'll say the same thing I said last time, and I had a council member mention that there was something wrong with me thinking these people are narrow-minded. But people are narrow-minded that don't understand that if we don't get the business people to pay the taxes, then the citizens are going to be paying the taxes. I happen to be both, so I get the double bubble, but every time something goes down, when I turned 65, my house taxes stayed the same, but my taxes on my building that I own across the street went up a whole lot more. Well, that's my building, so that's my money, so that means my taxes went up. That's fine, but we've got to get more people, and we've got to entice, I suppose, I don't know if that's a good word or not, we have to entice some more businesses and keep the ones. The thing or two that he said in here was that 90%, and I understand it's 80%. I understand that the 25% for additions, which I think is a good idea. And as I've said before, if we've got a good enough variance procedure to allow people that are already here, if somebody's going to build a building in town, then I can understand us making them put the best building we can make them put up. If a person's been here and invested a lot of time, energy, and money in the city of Haltom City over the years and then decide to add on to their building and their business, then I don't think they should be penalized. I think that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. Anyone else in the audience wish to address the council on this subject? Mr. Eklund?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. My name's Ray Eklund. I live at 2532 Oakwood Terrace. We've addressed the council before regarding the masonry corridor, and regarding the prior comments, I would like to ask the council, how far do we go forward with our city, or how far do we go backwards? You know, we could simply close down the code enforcement office and say, you know, we're going to go back to no rules at all, and say how many businesses want to come to our town then. You know, I spent a lot of time recently working with different groups regarding Belknap Street, and we took an inventory over there. We photographed the buildings. We'll soon be taking some aerial photographs off the web and doing some work with that. But what we're finding is, it is true, as the pictures that you have will show you, that just simply because it's a block building doesn't make it attractive. Okay? We have to consider the integrity of the neighborhood and the importance of the construction in the process. And I think what we'll find is these buildings that you're looking at were probably built in the 40s and the 50s with a couple of old boys out there with some cement blocks, and they stacked them up and they put together a business, and they went forward. And that was okay at that time. It's no longer okay in our city for our citizens to allow that to happen. We're asking now for quality development with the expectation to attract quality businesses. The days of, you know, the old boy underneath the tree taking care of the transmissions in the car are gone. Okay? We need to get good quality tax base in here. As you all know, Mr. Pliska and I have long discussed, masonry is a requirement for residential throughout the city for quite some time on every street, and there's a reason for that, although sometimes we disagree. But the reason is to try to bring the property values up and encourage quality development. We have had a real Wild West kind of background in this city with crazy zoning throughout the last 50 years and transmission shops next to people's houses and a myriad of things like that we're now on a path to correct. So whether you adopt the entire zoning corridors or you go with the entire city, that's up to you. You guys have all that. I just think the importance is to establish a higher masonry requirement and to make sure that we are developing quality businesses in our city. And I understand the temptation as a businessman to put up a cheap building and get to work. But in the long run, we'll all benefit from a quality construction and the masonry corridors or buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eklund. Anyone else like to address the council on this subject? Okay, there being none, I'll close the public hearing at this time, and we'll move forward then with the wishes of the council regarding this second reading of the masonry ordinance. What is the pleasure of the council? Councilmember Branson?
Thank you, Mayor. Could I ask just a couple of questions
Sure.
and get a couple of things clear before we do that? Mr. Pliska, currently homeowners have to have what percentage masonry on their homes, on new construction?
I believe it's 75% is for a single story, and then it's 50% it graduates up to 50% on the second story.
Okay. And would you have an opportunity to give us the percentages that our surrounding cities are asking on their commercial properties for the masonry? I think that would be a good comparison.
I certainly will. And it was in my report. I'd be glad to address that
Well, you tell it
for the
better than
record.
I can read it, so.
Okay, it, in North Richland Hills, requires 100% masonry for all non-residential structures in all commercial zoning districts. And I've attached table 6.2 from their ordinance of support. Keller requires 75% masonry for all non-residential structures in all commercial zoning districts, and that's in all commercial zoning districts. In the city's light industrial zoning district, exposed metal wall may be allowed through a special use permit or a conditional use permit as our zoning ordinance addresses those. And I've attached sections 2A and 2F in support of that. Richland Hills requires masonry in the city's C1 commercial district as 100% for the front, 85% for sides, and 60% on the rear of all non-residential structures within the district. In the city's C2 commercial district, masonry requirements is 60% of the exterior walls for all non-residential structures within the district. And I've again attached tables from their pages 15 and 17 in support of that ordinance. And then Watauga, which is receiving the great benefits of growth, requires 80% masonry for all non-residential structures in all commercial zoning districts. And I've attached paragraph L from their city ordinance.
When P&Z was reviewing this, they reviewed the percentages from the other cities, right?
Yes, they did, and we talked extensively about that, such that the report wasn't ready when I went to P&Z. We delayed the ordinance, the first reading of the ordinance was to take it back to P&Z when I found out that the other cities required an increase over our current 65%.
And did any of the other cities address new construction by square footage? Do you recall?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, so that's unique for us.
Yes,
Okay.
right.
Generally speaking, they would require that it be 100% or 80% or, I think that says 75.
Right.
Okay, so
Right.
we're actually giving them some benefit of the doubt on their new construction for those that are not currently existing on masonry, if this should pass.
Yes.
Okay.
And of course, in our ordinance, we also have that with the passage of this, those metal buildings become non-conforming buildings. They will be able to expand them up to 25% with staff's approval.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Lanford, and then Councilmember Sutton.
Well, I certainly think it's important to what the business community is saying to us, and certainly we're all aware that a desirable situation is one where we all share equally in the tax burden, and want to make it Haltom City be not only a good place to live, but a good place to do business. I think we've addressed most of the concerns that I've heard from the business community with the 25% expansion on existing buildings. That seems to me to cover most of the concerns. I would. Where was I? Well, I really think that that particular piece covers most of it. I will get my notes here straight and come back later. I think that's my biggest concern, that we've got a way that business won't be adversely affected. A process where concerns about different variances are, we've got a process where we can work through that for those cases that are special, such as running behind and stuff like that, or where it might not appropriate to have this coverage.
May I comment on that? You have sections of the Tarantula train pass through the city, and that is a spectator-type train, and there are industrial areas that passes through. So not necessarily the rear of a facility should be as facility. I would beg to differ on that. AAA seamless curve on Carson. He was excited that Carson was finally finished, and does appreciate the nature of the street as it is now, and totally believe that the city would do a good job on that street, and therefore he believes in his masonry structure and wants to see other facilities along that new street. And as such,
Anytime that a business owner says that that they would no longer be investing in the city, that certainly gets everybody's attention. But ask, in doing that, what is the basic? I'm not an investor per se, but I do know something. Location, 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 and to me, it seems like we'll have a better. If we have location, the and that type of program in Haltom City. I want to say that about where they have differences of prices they charge in some of the different neighborhoods that they're in. Some of the more wealthier neighborhoods, they charge a little bit lower than some of the ones that are not so high. And so for businesses that are in a location, I think that it benefits them the investment that we're willing to put into. So, one other point that hasn't been covered yet by any because the only person that's talked about as far as is Mr. Williams, who's a business in the community. They seemed to be concerned last night this ordinance to some of the corridors in the city, and that's why we had the two. Away. We only include corridors. So I'm still in a quandary about whether we should go one way or the other.
Watching on 8, this is first meeting in
As you all know, Mr. Pliska and I have long discussed, masonry is a requirement for residential throughout the city for quite some time on every street, and there's a reason for that, although sometimes we disagree. But the reason is to try to bring the property values up and encourage quality development. We have had a real Wild West kind of background in this city with crazy zoning throughout the last 50 years and transmission shops next to people's houses and a myriad of things like that we're now on a path to correct. So whether you adopt the entire zoning corridors or you go with the entire city, that's up to you. You guys have all that. I just think the importance is to establish a higher masonry requirement and to make sure that we are developing quality businesses in our city. And I understand the temptation as a businessman to put up a cheap building and get to work. But in the long run, we'll all benefit from a quality construction and the masonry corridors or buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eklund. Anyone else like to address the council on this subject? Okay, there being none, I'll close the public hearing at this time, and we'll move forward then with the wishes of the council regarding this second reading of the masonry ordinance. What is the pleasure of the council? Councilmember Branson?
Thank you, Mayor. Could I ask just a couple of questions
Sure.
and get a couple of things clear before we do that? Mr. Pliska, currently homeowners have to have what percentage masonry on their homes, on new construction?
I believe it's 75% is for a single story, and then it's 50% on a, it graduates up to 50% on the second story.
Okay. And would you have an opportunity to give us the percentages that our surrounding cities are asking on their commercial properties for the masonry? I think that would be a good comparison.
I certainly will. And it was in my report. I'd be glad to address that
Well, you tell it
for the
better than
record.
I can read it, so.
Okay, it, in North Richland Hills, requires 100% masonry for all non-residential structures in all commercial zoning districts. And I've attached table 6.2 from their ordinance of support. Keller requires 75% masonry for all non-residential structures in all commercial zoning districts, and that's in all commercial zoning districts. In the city's light industrial zoning district, exposed metal wall may be allowed through a special use permit or a conditional use permit as our zoning ordinance addresses those. And I've attached sections 2A and 2F in support of that. Richland Hills requires masonry in the city's C1 commercial district as 100% for the front, 85% for sides, and 60% on the rear of all non-residential structures within the district. In the city's C2 commercial district, masonry requirements is 60% of the exterior walls for all non-residential structures within the district. And I've again attached tables from their pages 15 and 17 in support of that ordinance. And then Watauga, which is receiving the great benefits of growth, requires 80% masonry for all non-residential structures in all commercial zoning districts. And I've attached paragraph L from their city ordinance.
When P&Z was reviewing this, they reviewed the percentages from the other cities, right?
Yes, they did, and we talked extensively about that, such that the report wasn't ready when I went to P&Z, if you'll recall.
Right.
And that's why we delayed the ordinance, the first reading of the ordinance, was to take it back to P&Z when I found out that the other cities required an increase over our current 65%.
And did any of the other cities address new construction by square footage? Do you recall?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, so that's unique for us.
Yes,
Okay.
right.
Generally speaking, they would require that it be 100% or 80% or, I think that says 75.
Right.
Okay, so
Right.
we're actually giving them some benefit of the doubt on their new construction for those that are not currently existing on masonry, if this should pass.
Yes.
Okay.
And of course, in our ordinance, we also have that with the passage of this, those metal buildings become non-conforming buildings. They will be able to expand them up to 25% with staff's approval.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Lanford and then Councilmember Sutton.
Well, I certainly think it's important to hear what the business community is saying to us, and certainly we're all aware that a desirable situation is one where we all share equally in the tax burden, and want to make it Haltom City be not only a good place to live, but a good place to do business. I think we've addressed most of the concerns that I've heard from the business community with the 25% expansion on existing buildings. That seems to me to cover most of the concerns. I would, where was I? Well, I really do. I think that that particular piece covers most of it. I will get my notes here straight and come back later. I think that was my biggest concern, that we've got a way that businesses that currently are here can expand their business and won't be adversely affected. And we've got a process where concerns about different variances we've got a process where we can work through that for those cases that are special, such as a railroad running behind them and stuff like that, where it might not be appropriate to have this coverage.
May I comment on that?
Sure.
We have sections of the tarantula train that pass through the city, and that is a spectator-type train, and there are industrial areas that passes through. So not necessarily the rear of a facility should not be as nice as the front of a facility. I would beg to differ on that. I've also had input from a property owner of AAA Seamless Gutter on Carson. He was excited that Carson was finally finished and does appreciate the nature of the street as it is now, and totally believed that the city would do a good job on that street, and therefore he believes in his masonry structure and wants to see other facilities that come in along that new street to come in as such and add value to his property.
Anything else, Councilmember Langford?
I've got some more things, but I'll let some other people speak.
Okay, Councilmember Sutton?
Thank you, Mayor. Bill touched on this, but anytime that a business owner says that they would no longer be investing in the city, that certainly gets everybody's attention. But I would ask, in doing that, what is the basic, I'm not an investor per se, but I do know something about real estate, and what is the number one rule in real estate is location, location, location. And to me, it seems like we'll have a better track record on investment by the business community if we have the location, the location, the location. It seems to follow that this masonry ordinance, the spirit of it is to begin to implement that type of program here in Haltom City. I want to say that Walmart recently, they had a thing on the TV about that, about where they have differences of prices that they charge at some of the different stores. And what were those differences but the neighborhoods that they were in? They charged a little bit higher in some of the more wealthier neighborhoods. They charged a little bit lower in some of the ones that were not so high. And so for businesses that are in a location that is good, I think that it benefits them directly by the investment that people are willing to put into a business that is in a good location. So there's one other point that hasn't been covered yet by anybody, and I was really hoping to hear someone in the audience talk about this, because the only person that's talked about it so far is Mr. Williams, John Williams, who's a business owner in the community, and he seemed to be concerned last time about selective application of this ordinance to some of the corridors in the city, and that's why we had the two ordinances, is we wanted to see, well, should we implement this in a phased approach where we'd start with some of the ordinances, or should we go the whole way? And that's what Mr. Williams seemed to be saying, is that it seemed to be selective application of the ordinance if we only include some of the corridors. So I'm still in a quandary about whether we should go one way or the other, but in the absence of anyone speaking of it, oh, good. There's someone out there that may want to speak about it. I'd really like to hear any comments on that.
Councilmember Clark, and Before you speak, let me ask a question of the attorney. I closed the public hearing a moment ago, and I have a citizen saying he'd like to speak on this. You would not? Okay. But could I reopen?
You can reopen the public hearing if it's appropriate.
Okay. I'll make that decision just a moment after Mr. Clark speaks. Councilmember Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Pliska, you're on the hot seat again.
That's fine.
Your reference sheet here on North Richland Hills, Keller, and Richland Hills and Watauga, do you have that one?
Yes, sir.
Okay. North Richland Hills, we say in all commercial zoning. In Keller, we say all commercial zoning districts. In Richland Hills, we say C2 commercial districts. In Watauga, we say all commercial zoning districts. That is the same as our that's the same as our zoning districts.
That is correct.
And that's the question for tonight. Do we implement this in zoning districts, or do we implement this in the entire city? If we implement it in the entire city, as we've heard from some people, we're putting more of a burden, is believed, on businesses coming in, my opinion. And if we do the same in districts and zoning districts, then we'll be in coordinates. We'll be comparable with the other cities and have a fair chance to get businesses in here, I believe.
Okay,
You don't
now-
have to comment on that unless,
Okay.
unless I'm wrong,
Okay.
and then you may.
Well, we're doing it through the city, through all of its districts. So that would be the commercial districts and the light industrial districts. So masonry would be required throughout the city, basically, for those zoning districts. Just as those cities, North Richland Hills, Keller, Richland Hills, and Watauga. The other ordinance is for corridors. And the corridors were basically established such that, okay, I'm leaving Hearst and I'm going into North Richland Hills, and that corridor remains the same. And I'm entering then into Haltom City, and then all of a sudden, it's metal buildings. So that corridor changes. So did that corridor increase in value, or did that corridor decrease in value? Well, it depends on the use of the facility, basically. But are we after architectural appearance and continuity in that corridor? Yes, I believe that's what the original ordinance was for. That's why we have the corridors in the beginning. It is a way to control growth when you have a city that is expanding, basically. But also you have a city that has that is already less than 10, 15, 20% of undeveloped properties. Now, do you wish to control those properties, to control the infrastructure and the growth or the construction of those 20%, let's say at the max? Then you may want to consider the districts rather than the corridors.
Thanks, sir.
Any other questions? Okay, I believe I will reopen the public hearing at this time. And Ms. Conley, I believe you wanted to address the question specifically raised by Councilmember Sutton and Mr. Watkins. If you have any comment, I'd be glad for you to follow Ms. Conley. Councilmember Lanford, you have your light on. Is that something you want to say?
Yeah, and I'll wait till Ms. Conley's through.
Okay.
Councilman Sutton, you were addressing Walmart selling a product for more in one area than another. Could it possibly be that it cost them more to build over in that other area, and they've got to make up for it? Excuse me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Conley. Mr. Watkins, would you like to address the council on this subject?
Bob Watkins, 6140 Blue Spruce Circle. I think I've stated the last time I was here that I don't agree with half of what John says, and that was one of them. I find that rather elitist, and not that John's elitist, but it's an elitist attitude that a person shouldn't attempt to. I've got a print shop across the street. Instead of building it out here, it costs less, even if I built it out of the same thing, because the property was less and all that. You should take advantage, if possible. If your business will do as good on a side street as it will on another street, you should take advantage of that. So I don't believe the person should be forced to build, necessarily, to build a masonry building on a side street, any more than I would say that you should have to build a building of a certain size with certain signage or whatever it is that you would do. That if a person can save, if it saves a business money and entices a business, there's that word again. Is entice a good word? It's a little iffy. Convince a business to move into your community if they can make it, if they feel like they can be as successful on a side street, then I don't necessarily believe that that they need to have as big a building or have it made out of necessarily made out of masonry building. I noticed that two of the buildings mentioned, two of the streets, or the only two actual streets mentioned here by Mr. Sullins was Moneta and Delonte. I also noticed that Mr. Sullins has buildings on Moneta and Delonte, which I think is fine. He has built two buildings down. Well, he's built more than two buildings. He's also got one around on Midway. He's building buildings, and they're not masonry buildings, and I don't believe there's anything wrong with having a building around in an industrial area. Now, I agree with James that was one of my first thoughts when I read this a while ago about backing up to a railroad. We're hoping that the railroad's going to come up through here and that people are going to be looking at the back of our buildings. So I would say that that would be a good reason to particularly have nice looking backs of your buildings. But I believe on the side streets and in pure industrial areas, I don't necessarily believe that should be a fact. Does that answer your question? I also wanted to address, I know it was an accident, but, and all of y'all know, I'm not sure all the audience knows what the masonry requirements in Fort Worth are. Zero. And I don't know what that means. They're too big, too old, but they also don't have them in Summerfields. They don't have it. They have no masonry rules in Fort Worth. So it just depends on where you're aiming for. All of that aside, as I've said before, I believe that we ought to. New people coming into town should build masonry buildings, particularly if they're going to be on something where somebody can see them. Seemed like it was something else, but I don't remember what. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. Anyone else in the audience wish to speak on this subject? Okay, I'll close the public hearing at this time. And Councilmember Lanford, I believe you had your light on a moment ago.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad Mr. Watkins brought up the M1 and M2 because I was going to ask James when we were going over the zoning masonry for the other surrounding cities. Specifically, this was around commercial property, and did not. I don't think but in one case there was some mention about light industry. I'm struggling with requiring industrial areas to have masonry requirements. That's a whole other issue. And I guess I would just ask if there's anybody else on the council who would object if we just struck the M1 and M2 from the construction standards section of this. I don't think we gain a lot from that. Go ahead.
Mr. Lanford, I would, without having the zoning map in front of me, just on my part as planning director, err to caution that there are a lot of heavy industrial zoned properties along 121, and then there's a lot of industrial zone properties along 28th Street. There are industrially zoned properties along Beach and Denton Highway.
I've asked that we address that, have I not? When are we going to address that?
That is correct. That would involve a
It's
lot
a nice
of
lead-in.
city-initiated rezoning.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, we need to address that. I'm aware of 121, that's an industrial area down there.
There's quite a bit of property that's north of 820 on Denton Highway is still heavily industrial on the west side.
North of 820 on the west side.
Yes, sir.
Is that the Derwiener Schnitzel side?
It's on the
Oh.
west side.
Yeah.
West side, the other
Oh,
side.
west side, the other side.
Right.
Yeah. The other east, west.
Up Beach Street?
No, on Denton Highway.
Oh, on Denton Highway, okay,
Denton Highway.
okay,
On the
yes.
Beach Street, there's extensive
Oh, yeah.
industrial from 28th Street to 820 and practically all the way to 820.
Well, I guess where I'm headed is that we need to straighten our zoning out rather than burden industries with having to have brick buildings or masonry buildings. That's just my humble opinion.
I understand it, sir, but if we do not include the industrial districts and do not have control over that, it's going to be a race to develop those properties like I've got in my department right now, which Mr. Sullins did, bless his heart. He has beat the punch and delivered plans for 2 metal buildings near Delonte and Midway.
Right.
Now, if we modify the heavy industrial or light industrial areas that can have or cannot have masonry and you don't have a corridor involved, then we'll have construction to begin that is not governed by the masonry along those corridors. Could present a problem by the time you rezone those.
What would be the problem if we rezoned them to, that's heavy industry down there, is it not?
Yes, sir, those properties are heavy industry, but in order to have those city-initiated rezones, you have to have public hearings, you've got to have workshops, studies, and then those ordinances to be passed. You're talking a year?
Well, we better get started.
Anything else, Mr. Lanford?
Yeah, there is. Just for the heck of it, I just want to go ahead and say I favor the zoning district approach here for this ordinance. I will tell you that if you just read the lanes that we've talked about and the other approach, they by and large follow the commercial districts. Our zoning map in general, commercial districts follow the main thoroughfares throughout Haltom City just like they do anywhere else. And I think that's a much more effective and simpler approach to simply say that all commercial areas, in other words, the zoning districts, this masonry ordinance would be in effect. Still, I haven't heard anything that can convince me that M1 and M2 ought to be included in this. I'm not sure I understand where the concern is if we omit M1 and M2.
There's substantial vacant properties along Denton Highway and Beach and 121 that are zoned industrial. If we omit industrially zoned properties from the masonry ordinance, then they can come in and build a metal building within a mason already.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Masonry
So if we do this, we could correct this later when we get our zoning correct. Is that?
That would take about a year to do that.
Okay, I'm on board.
Anything further, Councilmember Lanford?
I think that's it.
Councilmember Bransom, and then Councilmember Sutton.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for Councilmember Lanford. He confused me there for a minute. Well, I'm confused. Are you talking, when you said the one you were supporting, the corridors, the specific streets that were mentioned, or are you talking citywide?
Citywide.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Sutton.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, that was part of my question is whether you were going for the corridors, because what I'm hearing, Bill, is that some of the people are concerned about implementing this in all the commercial districts, and that they may not, that would be an encumbrance to their business. Whereas if we went with the corridor, the commercial, we might begin implementing the spirit of what this is about, in terms of our commercial corridors would begin to be lifted up.
We'll
Do you
keep-
have thoughts about that?
Keep in mind, Jim, that this mostly is going to affect new
Right.
buildings,
Not
current,
not
buildings.
existing.
Because current, existing building, we have a 25% leeway they can add, and so I just don't think that I don't think that's a big deal for current commercial
Okay.
district.
Okay, and I just wanted to make sure that you're talking about applying this to all the commercial districts, and of course the M1 and M2, you've thought about that. My thoughts on the M1 and M2 is if we do have a commercial district, I don't think we want to exclude M1 and M2 if they're right next to the C3 or C4, that would begin to break apart that symmetry that we're kind of looking for there in the business district.
Yeah, I'm resigned. I'm going to have to fight that battle later.
Okay, all right. I like your idea to do that later, though.
Councilmember Branson.
One more time, James, I'm sorry. I know we didn't send this back to P&Z for them to rewrite it. Did they discuss it in their last meeting at all on what the council had
No.
suggested doing and going citywide versus?
No, I just did it in the form of a brief to them as to how the ordinance is going. I remember when the P&Z looked at it, they were just simply looking at the
Right.
corridors.
Well, I didn't know if they had a discussion, and if they did, I was interested in hearing, since this was initiated by the P&Z and not, it was one of their initiatives, not one of ours, I was interested in hearing if they had anything to say on it.
Okay, is there any more discussion on this before I call for a motion? Okay, I don't believe no one has indicated a need for questions or further discussion. I want to remind the council that this is second reading, so whatever action we take tonight will be the final reading on this subject at this point in time. What we have presented to us as options to choose from is an ordinance to approve on second reading for specified corridors, or the other option is for all non-residential. So what is the wish of the council regarding the options we have for this second reading? Councilmember Lanford?
Well, I'll put a straw man out there. I'm going to move to approve ordinance 2004-02315, and this is the version in which, under Section 2A, construction standards, each of the following streets or segments of streets is lined through, which would mean that it would apply to all of the CF, O, C1, C2, C4, C3, C4, C5, M1, M2, and PD zoning districts.
Okay, you've heard the motion by Councilmember Lanford. Councilmember Reese?
That's for a second.
Councilmember Sutton?
It's also for a second.
Any discussion on the motion? Now, is everybody clear what we're voting on? Okay, anybody not clear? Okay, I'll call for the vote at this time. And the vote is 6-1 in favor. That carries. So, Mr. Pliska, if you would you tell us what we just did as far as the action that was taken on item number 11?
Yes, Mayor, I'll be glad to. The council formally adopted the second version of the ordinance, which is the one in which zoning districts of the city that are listed rather than the corridors and includes new construction or additions exceeding 25% in the community facilities, office C1 through C5, M1 through M2, and PD zoning districts.
Okay. I just wanted someone to summarize that, and I appreciate that. And I want to compliment the council on establishing a higher building standard. I believe when we do that, it increases the value of the property, not only where that is built, but also the surrounding properties. And when that happens, everybody wins. So my compliments to the council. We've been here an hour and 40 minutes, 35 or 40 minutes. Let's take a 10-minute stretch break, and we'll be back in and continue with item number 12. of moving a piece of property from C1 to C2. Mr. Pliska?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, citizens of Haltom City. This concerns Lot 3A, 3B, 4A, 4B, and 4C of the Hendry subdivision located at 4910 Broadway. This is formerly the Burgers and More, which is on the north side, or excuse me, the south side of Broadway, very, very close to us now. The site is zoned C1 commercial. The applicant is requesting a zoning change from the C1 district to the C2 commercial district in order to operate a restaurant and a convenience store with plans to apply for a beer and wine sales. At their meeting on December 14, 2004, the P&Z voted unanimously to recommend approval of the zoning change request from the C1 commercial district to the C2 commercial district to the City Council. I also formally submit for the Council's approval Ordinance O-2005-001-15 reflecting this zoning ordinance change.
Before I open the public hearing, do we have any questions or comments for Mr. Pliska? Councilmember Lanford and then Councilmember Branson.
Just want to make sure that we're clear to the public here that even though there are plans by the owner to operate a restaurant and a convenience store with plans to apply for a beer and wine sales, what we are going to look at tonight is simply a zoning change from C1 to C2, has zero to do with future plans to apply for beer and wine sales.
That is correct. We were just informing council and the public hearing of the intent of the applicant. It is a zoning change to the C2 is necessary for a convenience store. Now, whether or not the convenience store can sell beer or wine off premise is its relative location, whether or not it's within 300 feet of a church, school, whether it be private or public. And in this case, and that's a very good point, this case, a community facility zoning is directly behind or adjacent to this property. And that community facility is their soccer field. And the way our ordinance, which we passed, includes under Section 2C, the measurement of the distance between the place of business where alcoholic beverages are sold and the public or private school shall be in a direct line from property line to property line, not from door to door if it were close to a religious institution. So yes, they would come before this council for that variance provision in this ordinance, which you'll see later tonight, and or address the issue if the school files a protest through the TABC. Yes, sir.
Councilmember Branson.
Mr. Pliska, I'm sorry, I should have asked you this in the back, and I don't think it's going to sidewind you, but
That's okay.
where it's talking about a restaurant, is that a go in, sit down, and eat restaurant, or is that a kind of go in and pick it up, and maybe a cup?
That's a very good point.
Like a grill. Is it a restaurant like you're going to dine in, or is it a grill where you're going to?
That's a very good point. In discussions with the applicant, it is a takeout restaurant. They are not going to have the room as they plan it, and the applicant is here, by the way. They do not have the room, as my understanding, for a sit-down restaurant, but one in which they have takeout.
So a sit-down restaurant would require more parking, would it?
A sit-down restaurant, yes, would require more parking. They have, well, you don't have a
Is
detailed.
this the old Burgers and Shake?
It's the old Burgers and More, yes.
I'm sorry, Burgers
But
and
he owns
Shake
the
does
property
exist.
in the back. If it were successful, he could expand the parking lot to the rear of the structure.
Okay. Well, I just kind of wanted to give everybody an idea of what piece of property we were talking about on Broadway. Okay, thank you.
I have a question just for clarification. I believe if they're going to have a convenience store there, it needs to be C2. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mayor.
It cannot function in a C1.
No, we are now, and the way the ordinance is structured, okay, the way the ordinance is structured, it can be a restaurant or light commercial area, but not the heavy use of a convenience store. That has been placed into the C2 permitted uses.
So let's remember what Councilmember Lanford said. This has nothing to do tonight with the action the council takes on whether or not either a restaurant or a convenience store would be able to sell beer and wine. This is simply a zoning change request from C1 to C2 to allow for a convenience store on that location.
And that is a very important point, Mayor. for years, in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, that was a convenience store. The entire structure, including the hair salon that's part of that now, was a convenience store. It was a U-Totem or U-Floatem or something like that. Because I checked the past COs of the site. But with the ordinance amendment in 2002, we placed a convenience store in a little heavier zoning district. And it has not been a convenience store, but a restaurant, I believe, for the last 6 or 8 years.
Okay, anything further from the council? There being none, I'll open the public hearing at this time, and I believe the applicant is here. Would you like to address the council, or would you like to just be available if we have questions to ask? Yeah, if you would come to the microphone and give us your name and address for the record, please.
Just tell them when you'll be doing it.
Okay.
Give your name and address first.
Okay. My name is Sai. My address is 2908 Kimber Court, Fort Worth, Texas, 76111. And I want to open the convenience store to do bill payment and sell soda and the beer, but maybe it's sell for the hamburger for the dine-in, not sit down inside, because it's a small place. And I will do everything about how you say about the money order and maybe a cash check for a cash check too. Yeah.
Okay, members of the council, any comments or questions for the applicant?
Sure. I want to thank you for coming to the council. Thank you very much. And it seems like you're a little nervous, and don't worry. We appreciate you coming before and speaking.
Okay,
I just wanted to ask, when you do this restaurant, do you have any long-term plans to expand in the future?
Oh, the first time, no.
Okay.
Because the restaurant is, for me, is just a small place. Because I want to do the convenience store more than the restaurant. Because I know I work about how to do the bill payment and cash check and sell some beer and soda before.
Okay.
And I want to do that one more than the restaurant.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe there's nothing further. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Members of the audience, you may be seated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Members of the audience, anyone wishing to speak either for or against this request for change from C1 to C2 on the property at 4910 Broadway? Okay, there being none, I'll close the public hearing at this time, and council, I'm ready for action by you regarding whether or not to grant this request for zoning change. Councilmember Lanford.
Move to approve 0204-00115.
Okay, Councilmember Holcomb.
Could we get a clarification on that ordinance number?
I'm sorry?
I may have missed it, but Mr. Sutton or Councilmember Sutton made mention of that.
I've got it 0205-00115. Is that the right one? Okay. I don't know what I said, but.
Okay, do we have that corrected? Okay, Councilmember Holcomb.
And that's the second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve on first reading this ordinance that was the subject of this motion. If you will, register your vote at this time, please. And that passes by unanimous vote. This is the first reading, and Mr. Pliska, I believe it'll come up for second reading at the next council meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mayor. Thank you.
Moving then to item number 13, this is the gas well drilling and production in the city ordinance. This is a first reading of this one. This too is a public hearing, and after Mr. Pliska makes his presentation, members of the audience will have an opportunity to address the council on this subject.
Thank you, Mayor. It was discussed during the passage of the the gas well drilling ordinance, that we look at amending the city's zoning ordinance to address Section 38, building permit / subdivision requirements, to reflect gas well drilling / production in the city not to be included in the plating requirements of the city. Those discussions centered around the fact that this was a special type of use and therefore should not trigger these types of requirements. At their meeting on the December 14, 2004, the Planning and Zoning Commission voted unanimously to recommend approval of the amendment to the zoning ordinance, Section 38, building permits and subdivision requirements, as listed above.
Before I open the public hearing, does any elected official have a question or comment for Mr. Pliska? Okay, there being none, I'll open the public hearing at this time. Members of the audience, anyone wishing to speak regarding this first reading of this ordinance, would you like to address the council at this time? Okay, there being none, I'll close the public hearing, and we move now to the ordinance. What is the pleasure of the council? Councilmember Reese?
I would like to make a motion to approve ordinance number 0-2005-002-15.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Councilmember Bransom?
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, there being none, if you'll register your vote. And that passes by unanimous vote. We come now to item number 14. By the way, that too was the first reading of that ordinance. It'll come back for a second and final reading at the next council meeting. Item number 14 is a conditional use permit at 1811 Layton Avenue. Mr. Pliska?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, citizens of Haltom City. This concerns Lot 6B, Block 7, Oak Knoll Edition, located on the west side of Layton Avenue, and as you stated earlier, is located at 1811 Layton Avenue. The site is currently zoned C3 and does not allow for a transmission repair shop, which is what the applicant is requesting. The applicant is seeking a C4 commercial zone district with a conditional use permit and site plan approval to allow this use on the site. There is concern over adequate parking or vehicle maneuvering areas for this heavy of use on the site. Transmission repair generally requires vehicles to be stored at the site for several days or weeks until the repairs are complete. At their meeting on December 14, 2004, the Planning and Zoning Commission voted 5-1 to deny approval of this zoning change request and conditional use permit to the City Council. If the City Council decides to approve this case, it will take a supermajority of the City Council to override the P&Z recommendation. During the 200-foot notices, during the P&Z, we had a zero returned, we didn't have any letters come in favor or against, but in the interim time, we have had one letter come in, which is for this activity. Therefore, I formally submit the applicant's site plan indicating how the use will be structured on the property, and also the ordinance accompanying it should council choose so to approve this to go on.
Questions or comments for Mr. Pliska? Okay, there being none, I'll open the public hearing at this time, and I believe the applicant is here. And the gentleman beside him, are you the property owner? Okay, both of these gentlemen will give them an opportunity. Would you like to address the council or just be available if we have questions? Okay, and if you will, you're Mr. Rodriguez. If you will, give us your name and address for the record.
Okay. My name is Jose Rodriguez, and I'm on 1811 Layton Avenue. And I tried to open a transmission shop, repair shop inside the facility. And the problem I've been having is a parking space, which I already create parking space at the front, and I have parking space at the back of the facility. So.
Okay, members of the council, any questions for Mr. Rodriguez? Councilmember Hutchison, and then Councilmember Lanford.
Mr. Rodriguez, notice of your site plan that you're demolishing an existing building. How much parking space is that going to open up, sir?
When I demolish, it's going to be 5 parking spaces at the back.
How many parking spaces do we normally need for a transmission repair shop? Because you're going to keep a lot of those cars there, and a lot of those cars will be stored, and especially since you're demolishing a building, where are you going to store those cars inside your building if you don't have a building there? and how much space is needed to store available cars so that you can work on transmissions over a period of time?
Okay, I don't plan to keep too many cars in there. If they're gonna repair, we're gonna repair right away. If we wanna keep it for long terms, we don't plan to keep cars for long time. If the person take the car, if they be able to repair right away, we can do it right away. If they want to keep it for a week or two, we say no, thank you very much, thank you for your business, but we don't have a space to keep cars for a long time.
What kinds of transmissions will you be working on? Just regular passenger vehicles, and that's all?
Yes, transmission, automatic transmissions. That's all. Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Lanford?
Sir, how in the world could you have a transmission repair facility that did not require at least on occasion, the removal of the transmission? I mean, does most transmission repair take place like in a matter of minutes or hours versus days? I mean, that's...
I don't get your question.
Okay.
Can you explain it kind of
okay. Well, you were saying that your intent is to have a transmission repair facility, and that you expect people to drive in, get their transmission repaired, and drive off the same day. Is that what I heard you suggest?
Believe it or not, I can do it because I've been doing this I born and raised in my dad's shop, and I raised, and since I was a kid, I was working as a mechanic, and I've been doing it for my life. That's what I do for a living. And but yeah, you can do, if you really want, you can do one transmission. You take them off, put it back at the same day. You can, if you really want, you're interested, yes, you can do. Unless you don't find the parts.
Well, I think that's the major concern here is that like any reasonable businessman, you're going to want to take in as much business as you can, and that we're going to have cars sitting around outside with no transmissions in them or in various states of disrepair because there's just not enough room to put them inside. That's the concern.
Okay, yes, I don't plan to keep any cars outside. As far as if it's car without transmission, I don't plan to keep any cars in the parking lot, like to keep, I don't want this city to look bad because I bring cars and parking at the front or parking at the back. That's something that's not me.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. I like to, if I fix this transmission or I fix this car, I want to fix it right away and not keep for, like I said, too long.
Okay.
Anything further? Councilmember Sutton and then Councilmember Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for coming to the hearing. I appreciate that, Mr. Rodriguez. Was there any reason in particular why you selected this land versus another parcel of land in Haltom City that would more favorably allow you to park vehicles there?
I chose this city because I been hired by Yummy Ice Cream in 1987. So I've been working in this city around from 87.
I see.
From 1987 to today, I still work for that company. And so I love the city because I've been here for so long. So I like the city.
Well, and is there any reason why this particular piece of land versus another piece of land that might have a larger area for parking? Is there a reason why this particular piece of land is where you want to develop it? Maybe that you just own this land, or
I chose this land, this property, because that's all I can afford. Be honest with you, I cannot afford something bigger. If I will, I can buy something bigger, but that's all I can afford. My budget, that's all I can reach.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
That drives my budget a lot too. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez.
Councilmember Clark.
Mr. Rodriguez, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Rodriguez, how many people do you plan to employ?
Yes, 2.
I'm not in the transmission business. Luckily, I haven't had any problems. Does one person work on one car, one transmission, or do 2 people do a transmission together?
One person is going to be remove the transmission from the car. Nothing here. This person is going to be remove the transmission. He don't know nothing to repair.
How many bay spaces or spots do you have inside the building where the cars can be worked on?
Inside the building, you can put easy 3 lift jacks.
3 lifts, and you have to have the cars lifted off the ground.
Yes.
So if you start on a car on Monday and order the parts Tuesday and work it Wednesday, it ties up one of your lifts?
No, you can have 3 lifts. That's what I'm
It
saying.
ties up the one lift, but you still got the other lifts.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So what I'm trying to get at here is basically you'll be working on 3 cars, no more than 3 cars at a time, because that's all you can lift and get
That's
under
right.
and remove and replace and order parts.
Yes, that's what I can do.
Okay. And you said you have 3 lifts in the building.
Yes.
Is 3 lifts all the spaces, or do you have other spaces where you can
No,
push
you
your
have
car
extra
in?
space. You have extra space. But you can put 3 lifts.
So if you had to order a part that took 3 or 4 days to get in from Chicago, you could put that car off the lift and push it into one of the available spaces and put another one up on the lift?
Yes. You have a space inside the facility.
Space inside the facility?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. It answered all my questions.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Rodriguez?
Mr. Rodriguez, when you and I met a couple of months ago about this, and at the time I understood your intent was to work on, at least what I thought at the time was commercial vehicles, more like the Yummy vans and stuff. Has that changed? Because I heard you say you were going to be doing personal vehicles now.
No, no. I
Or
work for
did, I may have misunderstood you, and I apologize if I did.
Probably was misunderstood because Yummy Ice Cream doesn't have a small vans. They have only 3 vans, Dallas Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
Small regular van.
Okay.
The rest they're heavy trucks.
Okay.
And they have their own mechanics. So they remove the transmission at the shop. Dallas, and they have Irving here, Haltom
Mhm.
City.
Mhm.
They have Irving, Dallas, and Haltom City, plus Houston, San Antonio, Austin.
Okay.
They have branches
Okay.
in Texas. But they remove the transmission, and I fix the transmission for them.
All right.
But they do at their own location.
Okay.
I bring transmission from Houston or San Antonio, and I repair for them, and then I take it back to Houston or San, wherever, you know.
And you'd be looking to do that, some of that work there in this facility here.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
But they're going to be like carry out transmission. It's not
Okay.
like, the overhead is not even high enough for this kind of
Right.
trucks.
Well, I was envisioning, Yummy just had a huge fleet, and you're going to be doing nothing but Yummy vehicles, but apparently that's not the case.
Because they don't even
so-
reach in there.
Okay. All right.
Okay, Mr. Rodriguez, I thank you for coming, and we'll give others an opportunity to speak, and then if you need to address us again before the council takes action, we'll give you an opportunity to do that in just a moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the council. Thank you.
Does the property owner wish to address the council at this time? Okay, any other member of the audience wish to address the council since this is a public hearing regarding this application? Mr. Pliska, you have something for us?
Mayor, I need to point out that on his survey, that please bear in mind that he mentions the parking in the back, in which he would be taking down a portion of that building you see to the rear. This would be on the survey that you see here. That shows Layton Avenue along the bottom. If you'll note, that's 9.5 feet of ingress and egress to maneuver back to that area. That is a very narrow ingress and egress. So it will be a tight fit for any type of maneuvering back in there with the destruction of this metal portion, which is about the half of this portion. So even meeting, if he counts these 5 and these across here, we'll have to go to the zoning board of adjustments for minimum parking requirements. Still doesn't meet the minimum parking requirements for a transmission facility.
Okay.
But it presents a complicated and dangerous ingress and egress through there. It is probably doable. However, no emergency vehicles will have access to the rear of the property, given the situation.
Okay. Anyone else in the audience wish to address the council on this request? Mr. Milholland. And we do need your name and address for the record, please.
Robert Milholland, 3711 Jean Lane. Mayor, City Council, my understanding on this previously was that there was not going to be that the business to be located here before you now was going to consist of only automobiles brought in, not individual transmissions brought in. I heard a specific question at one point in planning and zoning where that specific question was asked, but the other answer was given. I've got down and on a bicycle and toured through that area, and next door to the north of this building is a daycare center across the narrow driveway. And back behind there is a residential neighborhood, single-family residential neighborhood that if you go through there yourself, you can see that there's some homeowners there that are renovating their houses, that it looks like it's an up-and-coming place. And I just don't think myself that this would be an appropriate location for this type of business. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Milholland. Anyone else? Okay, there being none other, I'll close the public hearing at this time, and we will move forward then for the council to take action. I do want to remind the council that since planning and zoning had voted to deny, that it will take supermajority, and our attorney tells us that's 6 votes to override the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So after having heard the public and the applicant with regard to this proposed use at 1811 Layton Avenue, what is the pleasure of the council? Councilmember Hutchison?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Rodriguez, with all due respect, I understand your budget constraints, and I understand wanting to have your own business, and I admire that. I respect that a great deal. I appreciate, too, the fact that you love this city, but I'm concerned about the surrounding area. I'm concerned about the access into your facility, especially into the area where you're going to be conducting your work and parking cars, with children around and daycare facilities and so on and so forth, the residential neighborhood. So I propose, I make a motion that we, for ordinance 02005, 00315, that we deny the ordinance that is proposed.
We have a motion to deny this request. Councilmember Lanford?
It's second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? There being none, I'll call for the vote at this time. And that is a unanimous vote by the council to deny this request. We move now to item number 15, a conditional use permit. Mr. Pliska, if you would.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, citizens of Haltom City. This is lot CR Block 1, Adco Edition, located on the north side of White Creek Drive. We know it as AA record. Containing approximately 2.51 acres of land and located at 5411 White Creek Drive. The site is zoned M2 heavy industrial and requires a conditional use permit with site plan approval in order to construct living quarters for security personnel on the site. The applicant is seeking a conditional use permit to allow for living quarters on this site for a security guard and personnel. The site is located as a commercial district according to the city's land use plan. And due to this, the CUP is just added on as a controlling factor in M2. At their meeting on December 14, 2004, the P&Z Commission voted unanimously to approve the request for conditional use permit with site plan to the City Council. I therefore submit the applicant's Exhibit A, which is a site plan of the perimeter project. In the pre-council, we did discuss the nature of the facility, and I did show a larger plan of the proposed structure to be built there, which is a 2-story facility housing this personnel. Also submit the accompanying ordinance O 2005-004-15 if the council so chooses to approve this. This ordinance is formally submitted.
Okay, again, members of the council, do you have questions or comments for Mr. Pliska before I open the public hearing? Okay, yes, Councilmember Lanford.
Well, this goes to the issue of living quarters. This would be living quarters as in the same kind of living quarters that, say, firemen would have at the fire station. While they're there, they live there, and then when they're off, they go live somewhere else. Is that That's your
Yes, sir,
understanding?
that is a very good comparison. It is a 24-hour facility. He has drivers coming in and out through the night, the day and evening, and has requested that he have this type of facility. It will also serve as those employees being there at that time will keep an eye on the large acreage facility.
Thank you.
Councilmember Branson.
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't understand they were going to be sleeping there. I thought the intent was it was for showers and lockers and that sort of thing. So I must have misunderstood.
Now, the comparison was done by firemen.
Well, and firemen
But this
sleep
is-
at the fire station.
We have not received a request that they're going to be, sleeping there.
Okay,
in
well, and
those-
my mind says firemen sleep at the fire station at night unless the bell goes off, in which case they all go to the fire or to the emergency. Since it's a conditional use permit, is it an acceptable practice to ask for a letter of intent since a CUP moves with, should the property be sold, that conditional use moves with that property at that time?
Absolutely. A letter of intent clearly specifies what the particular use for that facility will be and could be asked for at any time during this process or a certificate of occupancy process. Further spells out the use of the property. When the applicant explained it to me, if these guys are on the clock and they're 24 hours and they're waiting for a radio call to come in, hopefully they're not asleep. I don't think I'd pay them to sleep. But that's a good point. That's why we have these as a conditional use. You're looking at allowing as a residential living quarters in a commercial area. That is why it should have certain restrictions on it so that it doesn't turn into the primary use being residential as opposed to it being a much minor accessory use of the facility.
And that, I'm probably having problems with the semantics of living quarters, because when I think of living quarters, I think of residing there. And that doesn't sound like the intent of this, and that's why I was asking about a letter of intent.
And that's a good point, because the ordinance says residential quarters. Now, that could be construed as living. It could be, as depending on how you look at residential quarters.
Thank you.
May I ask a question to follow up just a little bit on that? With regard to the letter of intent, this is first reading of this ordinance. We'll have, a couple of weeks from tonight, we'll have the second reading. Is it possible for us to get a letter of intent back in our possession before the second reading of that?
Absolutely. That is a very good suggestion, Mayor.
Okay.
In fact, and/or any type of changes or amendments you want to make to the CUP. Now, in the CUP, the conditional use process, there are performance standards that the council is allowed to tweak however they wish. Operating hours, noise, glare, like Councilmember Branson suggested, really micro looking at what the use will be at that point.
I think part of the concern of the council is we do not want now or at any point in the future by action taken by the council for that to be able to be rented out or leased out as an apartment, or for somebody to live there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I believe that's what we're trying to
Yes,
be
sir.
sure it doesn't happen.
Yes, sir.
And if we could get a letter of intent that would be in our hands before the final approval of this ordinance, that might be helpful to this council. But I'm not putting words in someone's mouth, and that is not my purpose at all. I asked that question just for my information. So I've kind of forgot where we were. Do we have anyone? I need to open the public hearing. Okay, I'll open the public hearing at this time. Do we have anyone? Councilmember Hutchison, your light is on. Before I open it, would you like to?
We can have the public go ahead and speak, and then I'll speak after.
Okay, did you have a question specifically for?
Actually, I wanted to follow up with what you just got finished saying, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate you bringing that up. The letter of intent, not only, I would request that we not only have a letter of intent, and I think that's easily accessible, but want to make sure that that accompanies any future sale of this property too. And I think that covers what Councilman Branson has also said. When we issue a CUP, the letter of intent accompanies that whenever the sale of the property takes place.
That's a very good point. And again, CUP is transferable by ownership. And I will not only ask for the letter of intent, but I will also ask for notes like on the site plan itself, addressing some of these issues.
Councilmember Sutton, you had your light on briefly a moment ago, or I thought you did. Did you have something?
You carried my thought perfectly.
Okay. I will open the public hearing at this time to allow members of the audience who wish to speak regarding this request for a conditional use permit. Do we have anyone in the audience wishing to speak either for or against? Okay, there being none, I'll close the public hearing at this time, and I will request a motion from the council regarding its wishes on this item. Councilmember Branson.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that we approve for first reading ordinance number 2005-00415 with the stipulation that we have a letter of intent and notes on the site plan at our next council meeting for the second reading.
Okay, you've heard the motion. Councilmember Hutchison.
I would second that motion.
Have a motion and a second to approve with the condition of the letter of intent. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, there being none, if you will register your vote, I will display it, and that carries by unanimous vote of the council. Item number 16 is a beer and wine sales variance. This is not a public hearing, but Mr. Pliska, you've been pretty busy tonight, and I think this
Yes,
one
sir.
falls to your area of responsibility as well.
That's quite all right. We had rest over the holidays. Track 4E2H Largent Survey, Abstract 959, that basically telling you that it's unplatted property. He's located at 4000 Denton Highway. Mr. Shamim Khan is asking for a variance for off-premise beer and wine sales at the above stated address. Mr. Khan is within 300 feet of two churches. Sale of alcoholic beverages ordinance number O2004-006-01, section 2A1 states that it shall be unlawful for any person or entity who is engaged in the business of selling alcoholic beverages to sell the same at a place of business that is within 300 feet of a church, public or private school, or private hospital. However, section 2H gives the city council authority to hear this section in this format after notification of property owners within 300 feet has been accomplished, and this notice not be 10 days before the date of the hearing. I list, therefore, for the council, site plan indicating the gentleman's place of business, and then also on this survey indicating the close proximity of Calvary Chapel of Fort Worth to the rear of the facility. Adjacent to the rear south, more or less to the southeast, is the Diamond Oaks Church of God as well. I also list for the council the property owners within 300 feet as is spelled out by the ordinance. We did receive 2 letters back in these notices. A written response was delivered to the city by Calvary Chapel dated January 3rd, 2005 and signed by the church board of Calvary Chapel, and I've submitted that for your review. Today we also received a letter of recommendation of which he did not have objections, and that is, of course, from the property owner on this issue.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Pliska at this time? Councilmember Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Pliska, as I understand it, this building faces Denton Highway,
That is correct.
and there's a church behind it adjacent to the property.
That is correct. The church abuts it and is indicated on the survey immediately to the east of this facility. Separating the facility from the church is a screened, fenced area bordering his property from the front of the building facade all the way to Diamond Oaks Drive.
So I'm assuming that from the church, you cannot see the front of the store? From the church parking lot, you cannot see the front of his parking lot?
No, sir. There's also a grade difference, too. When I visited the site, there's a slight grade difference.
Okay.
That particular property in front has a substantial grade difference, probably about 2.5 feet.
And I drove by there today, and I talked to Mr. Khan also. From the other church, I don't believe from their door you can see the front parking lot of his establishment on Denton Highway.
No, sir. And that's a good question. On the south I guess on the south portion, it's broken into 3 suites as well as his convenience store. And that portion is an appliance repair facility, and then immediately facing the Diamond Oaks Church of God is, I believe it's a hair, like a barber shop or.
Okay. I'd like to say that, for the record, I'm not opposed to Mr. Khan having a livelihood and increasing his livelihood, and I'm not opposed to the city increasing sales tax. I think we need to look at the letter of the law and the intent of the law. I believe the intent of the law is to keep homeless, vagrant, whatever type people from wandering into these areas, and to be seen from people in these areas that don't want to see this type of a person. We have state laws and city laws as opposed to purchasing and walking on the street, drinking, the public street. You can't do that. You can't purchase and go into his parking lot and drink. You can't do that. In a convenience store situation, you have to carry out your alcohol product in a paper sack or a plastic bag, so it's not even seen from the car park next to you, much less the church. And I said I'm not opposed to the city having increased sales tax. And I bring that to mind that this past year, the fire department lost 9 firemen. I believe 8 of them were because of financial gains they can make to go into another city, and I think Hearst got 4 of them. The police department lost 2 officers. One went to the private sector for more money, and one went to another police department for more money. When I took this job, I said my primary goal was to increase benefits and salary and maintain our people. Now, I know this little bit of sales from beer will not make that much of an impact, but I believe we need to look at the intent and the letter of the law and the situation in the building, the parking lot, the paper sack, the plastic bag, and weigh the whole picture as to he increasing his livelihood, sending his kids to college, and us to increase a small amount of sales tax. Thanks, sir.
Do we have any other discussion on this item before I call for a motion? Councilmember Sutton and then Councilmember Lanford.
Right. Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to request, Mayor, that I know this is not a public hearing, but there are people here that would like to speak on this matter. Could we open this up for a public hearing?
That's a question for the attorney.
Mayor, I'm going to throw that right back at the city council. It's council prerogative whether you want to allow people to speak. It is not required by law. This is not a public hearing. If you wish to open it up under your rules of procedure, you certainly have the option of doing that.
Will you allow me to open a public hearing on this without the council having to take any action to mandate that?
That would be my preference.
Mayor, if I could.
Yes.
We really, if I have the correct copy of the ordinance, we should include it as a public hearing. I believe that's why we put it in the list of public hearings. Under Section 2H, it says under the heading of the variance, no variance may be granted herein except after a public hearing for which notice has been given to real property owners. Although it's saying notice of the public hearing with property owners within 300 feet, I would say it would be a good idea to open that up as a public hearing.
Thank you, James. I agree. If the ordinance requires a public hearing, even though it's not listed on the agenda.
It wasn't posted as a public hearing, and
It's
I'd
open as a
always, if
public
I
hearing.
have to err, I'd rather err on the side of giving citizens an opportunity to address the council.
Thank you, Mayor.
With permission of the council, I will open a public hearing at this time to allow members of the audience who wish to speak on this. And Mr. Khan, as the applicant, give him the first option. Would you like to address the council at this time or just be available to answer any questions we might have? To be available or to? Okay. Members of the council, do any of you have any questions you'd like to ask Mr. Khan? Any comments you'd like to make? Okay, I don't believe there are, Mr. Khan. Thank you. Members of the audience, anyone here wishing to address the council? Yes. If you would, please come to the microphone, give us your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you, Mayor White.
Would you pull that down a little bit?
And City Council board members, thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf. My name is Hope Hill. I'm a member of Calvary Chapel Church, that's located at 5617 Diamond Oaks Drive. Our church abuts the subject property that's requesting the variance. Although you can't see the front of their store from our church, you can see the rear, and people that come and go do come in contact with our church. Since we're located immediately behind the business, people coming and going do come by our church. For obvious reasons, we object to the sale of beer and wine located within 300 feet of our church. It seems counterproductive to pass an ordinance and then offer variances. We have approximately 500 members to our church. A lot of children are playing around our park. Playground is immediately behind the church, abutting also the premises that would be selling liquor, or wine and beer. As a matter of fact, just Saturday, we were there cleaning out our storage room, getting ready for a outreach. And we had a visitor, and I know this isn't indicative of the business now, but the neighborhood, we had a visitor of a person that was obviously intoxicated and handled it, but it would be nice for it not to be any worse than it already is. One of our church's goals is to improve the community and to improve Haltom City. And passing this variance would not promote that. Again, as they stated, there's another church that's located immediately across the street from the subject business, and I'm surprised they're not here representing their behalf. But 2 churches within 300 foot, that seems a bit much. Also, if our church continues to grow, it's not impossible that we may have a Christian school as part of our church located at that facility, which would mean church and school within 300 foot of a business selling wine and beer. I would like to implore the board members to not approve of this variance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Anyone else in the audience? Yes, sir, Mr. Eklund.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Ray Eklund. I live at 2532 Oakwood Terrace. Mrs. Hill's comments reminded me that this is the facility that we enjoyed our July 4th festivities in Haltom City. On their property, they own a large, I believe they just bought another tract to the north there. It looks like a park. They had music and a festival out there for the entire city to come by and enjoy. You know, it's unfortunate sometimes that these 2 things would collide, but the state law hasn't changed. The state law has been 300 feet of a church. I suppose when you open a store near a church in a dry city, and then it moves to be wet, that you may in fact get caught with that. And I've spoken with not Mr. Khan, but another business owner who was concerned about it, and sure enough, he was outside 300 feet, so he was very happy about that. But sometimes that's just the luck of the draw. So Mr. Khan's property there just is next to a couple of nice churches that have served the public, and if their wish is not to have it, I think we should give some weight to that. There are plenty of other opportunities. I don't suppose we sell 1 more can of beer. The whole argument in the wet thing was we're not going to sell any more or less to the people. They're just going to get it here rather than there. And extending that argument to the next level would say you're not going to sell any less. They'll just go down the street a couple blocks and get it. So that is not next to the church. So with the idea that the state law said 300 feet for a reason, and the fact that we have 2 churches right there in 300 feet, I would like the council to consider not approving this particular variance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eklund. Do we have anyone else wishing to address the council? Okay, there being none, I'll close the public hearing at this time, and we will move forward then with the council taking action regarding this request for a variance. Councilmember Lanford, I believe your light was on first, and then Councilmember Hutchison.
Well, I wanted to follow up on some of the discussion we had in the pre-meeting, and I appreciate you, Ms. Hill, coming and making your statement, because we were having a discussion about the one response that we have here is from Calvary Chapel. It's written, and it's quite kind, and in fact, when I read it, I thought it was borderline tacit approval. That's how it was written, and I invite you to, if you haven't read it yet. Yes. So that was confusing and confusing to me. Some other members weren't quite as confused as I was, but I would one thing that bothers me, and I first before I go on that, I want to say that I certainly think that this was a reasonable request. The traffic for Mr. Khan's business, by and large, enters from Denton Highway and leaves by Denton Highway. That's the predominant in and out, and never goes by the church. I understand some does, but primarily it doesn't, and so I think it's a reasonable request. Certainly understand that that state law is written for, as Ray says, for a reason. My concern here tonight is that there appears to have been some confusion about whether or not this was to be a public hearing. I'm a little concerned that, as Ms. Hill pointed out, that the other church wasn't here. No other residents were here. Where is the opposition? And I think we can sit up here and surmise that there might be opposition. There we can guess, but I don't see anybody. And I've got a letter here in front of me that's, like I say, it says here that Shaman has been wonderful and very kind, and we don't want to see any financial harm come to him. I would like to suggest that we consider putting this matter on hold, and next time around make this clearly advertised as a public hearing, so that we get some input from some folks, so that we see. I mean, I'm inclined to deny this, but I don't hear a outpouring, an outcry here of disapproval.
Councilmember Langford, we are required to send notices to property owners within 300 feet of this requested variance, and I'll ask Mr. Pliska if that was done, informing them of the meeting tonight, of the hearing tonight.
Yes, yes, Counselor, it was done, but I hope I have the right copy of the agenda. We did put this under the public hearings. So it's listed, although it's not mentioned in the text of the agenda item, but it is listed with the public hearings. And it is mentioned in the ordinance. And we did do the 300-foot ordinance, the 300-foot notifications. And if you'll note, I am surprised that the Church of God is not here, because they are on that list. I believe you all have the list of the 300-foot. And they are on that, as well as the residents that were caught in that 300-foot.
James, do you have a copy of the notice that was mailed to each
yes,
of the
I do,
property owners?
and they have it in their packet. In preface of the in preface of the letter from Calvary, we indicate the notice of the conditional of the council. It says here, consideration and/or action regarding the application of Shamin Khan for a variance to Ordinance 2004-006-01, sale of alcoholic beverages in the C3 Commercial District in order to obtain a license for off-premise beer and wine sales. Track 42E, as we discussed earlier, and gives the location, which is within 300 feet of a church and locally known as 4000 Denton Highway.
James, my concern is, this notice here doesn't say that the city council will be meeting tonight to discuss the variance, and if you have input, please show up. I think that's the question that council.
The cover letter does, and this is
Okay.
not, this is just simply the response letter that comes
Right.
back to us.
That's why I was asking about the
Right.
actual notice of the public hearing, whether or not that was sent to the property owners
Yes, it
within
was.
300 feet.
The cover letter discusses the time and date of the public hearing and is included with this. This portion doesn't say that because that is what is sent back by the property owner for staff's files.
So your thoughts, Mr. Attorney?
Well, that was the concern I heard from Councilmember Lansford, that he wanted to make sure that people were given notice of the fact that we were going to be discussing this tonight as a public hearing, because there are very few people here who showed up to speak on this. But if they were given proper notice, then I think that is indicative of whether or not they had objections that they wanted to voice to the council.
I'm going to dispense with our usual protocol here just a little bit. Mr. Eklund, I believe, has got something here. Does that say public hearing? Is that the way it's? If you would.
Ray Eklund, Oakwood Terrace. I would like to point out that the printed agenda does, every other item on here says conducted public hearing and consideration and or action regarding, and then it goes on. This item does not say conducted public hearing, right? And now we have ordinances and public hearings at the heading, but we often have ordinances that we don't get to speak on. Back to the idea of the notice, public hearings, in my belief, aren't limited to the persons within 300 feet of the property, right? And so the public notice is required to go out to all of the citizens or anyone else that might be interested, and this would simply not tell us at all that this is going to be a public hearing. So, Mr. Mayor, I would feel like we ought to put this down and do it right and let the public know through the website and, your regular notices that this is going to be a public hearing on this item.
Yeah, I thought you had something that said public hearing on it, but that's fine. I appreciate that. In view of that.
Yeah, I might just clarify, just so everybody understands. First off, there are public hearings required by certain statutes or ordinances, and the notice that is given to the public of a public hearing differs in those statutes and ordinances. There's no general requirement that you send notice to everybody in the city of a public hearing. As a matter of fact, the most typical types of public hearings that you see are the ones we had tonight on zoning cases. And the state law says you need to mail notice to everybody within 200 feet prior to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting and publish notice in the newspaper 15 days before the city council meeting. That is one type of notice. There are other public hearings required by state law where no notice at all is required to be given. You simply are required to hold a public hearing. And our ordinance is a hybrid. It sounds like our ordinance requires that we mail notice to everybody within 300 feet, informing them of a public hearing, and then hold a public hearing before the city council. The posting on the agenda, although it may be confusing, is adequate. The way it's posted, it is adequate to hold a public hearing. It does comply with our ordinance, as long as the notice that we sent to everybody within 300 feet said that there will be a public hearing tonight in the city council chambers. That was my only concern, to make sure that we complied with the notice requirements. And Mr. Pliska says that we did. I haven't seen a copy of it, but if we've complied with those notice requirements, then we've done everything we need to.
There's a cover sheet.
So, the public hearing tonight is legal. The council can take action tonight. If you feel for whatever reason you want to give more notice before you make a vote, then you certainly have that option. But I'll let that be your decision.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. And before we got off on this discussion, Councilmember Lanford had the floor. So, are you still have some things you want to say?
Yeah, I wanted to show the audience this. This is the letter that we talked about, and Calvary Chapel did write a letter, but right up here, sort of in the middle here, where it says, I do not have any objections, or I do have objections, that's blank. It is blank. It says see letter, and I see the letter, and the letter is, I mean, it sort of alludes to that they don't support the drinking of alcohol, but that's about it. And I guess part of what's going on with me is that in order to be fair to this man, and give him because I believe his request is reasonable. It's a reasonable exception to the normal rule of 300 feet. It's not unreasonable. At the same time, I suspect, I don't know, I suspect that if we approved this tonight, that there's a good possibility there would be a firestorm of protest and people would be upset. And I don't want to make these people upset. They're good neighbors. They're a wonderful addition to our city and our community, and I want to keep them, and I want to keep them happy. I just don't think that we've got what we need to make a decision tonight. That's just my opinion.
Councilmember Hutchison, and then Councilmember Holcomb and Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With all due respect to my colleague, Councilman Lansford, mention has been made about the number of people who showed up to oppose tonight, but or the lack of number of people that show up to oppose, but I certainly don't see as many people here to support either. And so and taking into account what the legal issue of having a public hearing, I'm satisfied with the way that has been conducted and the request that's been made. And with all due respect to you, Mr. Khan, you have every right to request a variance according, we're breaking new ground because we just approved the sale of beer and wine, and so we're kind of feeling our way around on how to deal with these variances. But I've seen three people, and I think a clarification of the letter that was written by Ms. Hill, and thank you, Ms. Hill, for showing up for that. I make a motion that we reject the variance that has been requested under ordinance under the CC 001-05.
We have a motion to deny the request for this variance. Councilmember Holcomb.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Councilmember Sutton, you had your light on a moment ago.
I must have just hit it accidentally. I'm
Okay.
not sure.
Councilmember Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to respond on Mr. Hutchinson's remark that he doesn't see people in support. What I read in the church letter is the question of alcohol. And I believe the citizens, the majority of citizens in this city voted to allow beer and wine sale in the city as a revenue generator. And I believe that would be the people who would support and endorse this variance. State law gives us the ability to have the variance, to be questioned and called on a variance. State law also says that you can't drink on the property. State law also says you can't walk down the street drinking out of a brown sack or a beer in your hand. State law also gives Ms. Hill and the church the ability to call the police when someone is drunk or vagrant behind the building. And this building faces the opposite direction. So therefore, I'm opposed to Mr. Hutchins' motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I believe Councilmember Hutchison had his light on first, and then Sutton, Holcomb, and Lanford in that order, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I want to respond to that because I am a firm believer that that the citizens ought to get what they voted for. I agree with that, but I also believe that the ordinance says that they can't sell beer and wine within 300 feet of the church, and that's property line to property line. And clearly, we have an ordinance in place. Excuse me, state laws.
Front door to
Front, excuse me, front door to front door. I apologize. And that is also a clear ordinance, and that's what I'm referencing, not specifically the sale of beer and wine. Thank you.
Could I comment, since we're on measurements right now? It is coming to you because we subjectively feel that they're within 300 feet. Now, the final say will be the TABC, but it will be such that prior to your vote and however you decide, that is voicing your protest or support of this in which we subjectively believe that it's within 300 feet. We need to make that clear.
And I was discussing that with Mr. Pliska a while ago to try to get some clarification on that. It's my understanding that the applicant may be within 292 feet of one of the churches, and that may be the only distance restriction that they're in violation of. So just for clarification.
I want to ask a question. Have we measured the distance?
Yes, we have. And we've done that. We've done that as per TABC rules and with an engineer's wheel.
Okay.
But those are subjective measurements based on what they have the final say-so. It's a form of a application process. It needs to go through the planning and zoning office to determine whether or not it lies within 300 feet. We believe it lies within 300 feet. If it does, then you have the right to either not protest it or protest it. And this is a format of protesting or not protesting, much like the school district would if it lies within 1,000 feet. Such that, given the vote for tonight, I will take that to the TABC and say, you make sure that these measurements are true and correct.
I heard 292 feet a moment ago. That sounds awful close to 300. If they come back and say it's outside of 300, then all of what we've done tonight has just been an exercise in futility.
No, not in futility. It is a form of whether or not you protested it lies within 300 feet. But they have the final say, so I can't push the application forward without this step.
Okay.
Right.
Councilmember Sutton, Holcomb, Lanford, and Branson.
Mercy. There's going to be conflicts of interest in the city. I think that's what the city council does, is it resolves these conflicts of interest. And that's why this law was put up about the 300 feet, that was the way the state resolved it after a lot of debate and discussion down in Austin, that, hey, this is the condition. And then they gave a little bit more condition to muddy the water a little bit more, saying the council can decide for variances. But I think what we've heard tonight, at least what I've heard tonight, is that there's a church that is considering expanding in our community, providing more service to our community. They've already have a track record of doing things in our community, as well as the business owner that is supplying goods to our citizens. They both are doing something for our city. Herein lies the problem, is how do you differentiate between the interest of both of those? I would maintain that if we approve this, it would be a negative effect upon the church body that exists there, and for their expansion for the school or for whatever's going to happen down the road, that would tend to be something that would maybe become a mission field for them. I don't know. But on the other hand, for Mr. Khan, if we don't approve this, then for him to expand his business, that becomes more difficult. So we're going to have to solve this here tonight and weigh these differences, but I think that the law has been pretty clear about the 300 feet. If that's within the 300 feet, to me, it seems like it's just cut and dried.
Okay, I think our attorney has a thought.
I just want it to be clear to the council members before you take a vote tonight. In May, we had a local optional election. The citizens approved certain types of alcohol sales. In June, the council approved the ordinance that we're dealing with now, which established the 300 feet prohibition. That is not a state law. It is a city ordinance that restricts the sale of alcohol within 300 feet of a church, school, or a hospital, okay? So you adopted that ordinance in June, and you adopted variance procedures. State law says a city council may adopt the ordinance prohibiting sales within 300 feet, and a city council may grant variances to that 300 feet. You chose to do both. So it is an ordinance, it's a local ordinance that is the regulation that is before you, and the variance is in your ordinance. There's no
Everybody clear?
Thanks, Wayne, I appreciate that clarification.
Councilmember Holcomb, we'll get to you in just a moment. Councilmember Holcomb?
I'm sorry, Mayor. I thought I turned my light off. In the interest of time, I'm sure I would be doing nothing more than repeating several things that have already been mentioned. So I've got nothing to add.
Councilmember Lanford?
Well, I just wanted to go on record before if we're going to have this vote tonight. I will vote against the denial, but I want to make it clear to the citizens of Haltom City and as well to my compadres here on the City Council that I'm not voting to approve necessarily Mr. Khan to sell beer and wine within 300 feet of a church. What I am standing up for is a fair and orderly process that I believe has been abridged, and that we're making some assumptions here about how strong the objections are. Ms. Hill did make it clear, and she does represent Calvary, and I'm perfectly willing to accept that. I'm just saying, and we all know that the people who are for are driving up and down Denton Highway right now, and may or may not be citizens of Haltom City, but they're just potential customers of Mr. Khan. And again, I want to say very clearly that I appreciate so much what your church does, and the active role that you take in our community. And I hope you understand, I'm just struggling here for some direction, and I'm not getting a lot of direction. I'm getting a little, and that's the part that bothers me. That we're telling a man that we're going to impact his livelihood because we think there might be some widespread objection, and I suspect that's true, but I'd like to see it. I don't have to see 300 people down here, but it would help to see 2 or 3 instead of one person and one letter in which it is not clear, and where the church had a place to make it clear that they do have objections, that's left blank, and that bothers me.
Councilmember Branson.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, I hope I don't get off track here, but I have a question, and it may go towards Mr. Plisker, or it may go towards the attorney. I know in other variance procedures, ZBA and some others, that once a precedence is set for giving variances, that it becomes increasingly difficult to deny, well, I can come up with some, we have someone shaking their head no. I respectfully disagree. The appearance is that it becomes increasingly difficult to deny another variance because of possible litigation. You let this person have one, they were within, I'm going to use this for an example, they were within X number of feet. I was 2 feet further apart and you denied it. Are we treading on those same types of ground here?
It's a difficult task being a city council member, but every decision you make needs to be reasonable under the law. You cannot be arbitrary, you cannot be unreasonable. And probably the simplest determination for whether or not you have acted unreasonably when you approve one variance and deny the other is the court's going to look at whether there were similarly situated circumstances. And if you can distinguish why, in a reasonable manner, you distinguish between the 2 applications, then the courts will uphold your decision. But if you can't distinguish that for the court and you arbitrarily give a variance to one person and deny it to another, it's subject to challenge. You're not setting precedents,
Okay.
but you are at least creating a record of whether or not a particular variance is okay. And if the next variance were to fall in a cookie cutter, exact same classification, exact same similar circumstance, you have to be prepared to distinguish why it's different in your mind if you vote differently.
So if my mind processed through the list that, say, for example, the ZBA uses when they address a variance, would that same type of list be appropriate for addressing a variance on a beer and wine sales permit?
You have different standards tonight than the Board of Adjustment uses, and if,
I mean, just generally speaking, you know,
Council, would you like me to read them? Would you like me to read the
it probably wouldn't hurt, unfortunately, to go ahead and read those. I know the motion on the floor is to deny, but it would be good for the council to understand the conditions under which you can grant a variance. James, do you have those?
Yes, sir. It's under section 2H. And the city council may allow a variance to this section if it determines that the enforcement of the regulations in a particular instance is not in the best interest of the public, constitutes waste or inefficient use of land and resources, creates an undue hardship on the applicant for a license or permit, does not serve its intended purpose, is not effective or necessary, or for any other reason the city council determines after consideration of the health, safety, and welfare of the public and the equities of such regulations that the variance is in the best interest of the community. No variance may be granted hereunder except after a public hearing for which notice has been given to the real property owners within 300 feet of the location of the place of business seeking a variance. Such notice must be provided not less than 10 days before the date set for hearing to allow such owners who have rendered said property for city taxes as the ownership appears on the last approved city tax roll.
Okay. Having said all of that, I know I set aside our normal protocol a moment ago, and I don't like to do that, but when you do that, you set up a chain of events that we've got another request. Ms. Conley, do you have anything to add to this? Okay. And then I'll make a statement, and then we will call for the vote.
Yes, sir. I was just kind of thinking back there, you know, if it was a school, I could see because you would be selling the beer and wine during the school days and children would be walking before it and back and forth. These are churches that aren't even around it. And they only, Sundays is their days, and you cannot buy beer or wine until after 12 o'clock on Sundays. So, you know, what's that? I'm sorry, but that's what my thought is. I think you ought to be able to make a living.
Okay, I want to say just a couple of things. We'll call for the vote. We do have a motion on the floor made by Councilmember Hutchison, seconded by Councilmember Holcomb, to deny this request for variance. A lot has been made tonight about the content of the letter signed by the church board. Being on a church board and having pretty extensive experience in that area, that's a typical letter coming from a church. They want to be good neighbors. They want to be diplomatic. They're not going to come right out and say, no, 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 you're not going to do that. They're going to take this particular approach. But if anybody reads into that they're in favor of this, I've got a bridge up in Brooklyn somewhere I want to sell you. This is not what the content of that letter is. The second thing I need to ask, because we've got a lot of confusion going here, I need to be sure the motion is to deny, Mr. Attorney. If, when I call for the vote, we have more people to vote against denying this, is that a vote in favor of, and will this variance pass?
No, we will look at the motion as made, a motion to deny. If it receives a majority of the votes, then the variance is denied. If it does not receive a majority of the votes, then you have no action that you've taken, and you should ask for whether there's another motion to be made.
Okay, and I could ask for that motion tonight. It wouldn't have to.
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to be sure because we're confused enough already.
Okay, well, yeah, logically, I mean, if the motion to deny fails for lack of a majority vote, then logically, from what I've heard tonight, there could either be a motion to approve or a motion to continue. to clarify the public hearing issues.
Okay. All of that having been said, we have a motion on the floor to deny. If you will register your vote, I will display it. Everybody got it registered? Okay, the motion passes by a vote of 5-2 to deny the request for a variance. That item being concluded, we move now to the Visitor Citizens Forum. We do have Ms. Conley, who has filled out a request to appear before the council to speak on flat rate on water. Ms. Conley, if you'll come forward, I want to remind you that this time is set aside. You've heard me say that before. Set aside for any person having business before the council that is not scheduled on the agenda to speak to the council. The council cannot discuss or debate this matter you're bringing before us, nor can any formal action be taken because it was not posted in accordance with the open meetings law. Okay? Give us your name and address again, please.
I haven't moved since, but my address is 3913 Kirby Street, Haltom City. I told Mr. Tom Muro that I would be back this month and next month and whenever I can find out some answers, if he has even looked into it. I know that it was during Christmas or everything, but I do think that we should be giving our elderly and disabled citizens a break on the water and giving them a flat rate instead. I mean, we can't manufacture money out of nothing. I got a 2% increase in my disability this year, and Haltom City has taken it all in their water bill. I'm sorry, but it doesn't seem right. So I was just wondering if he had heard anything or looked into it.
I don't have anything positive to report. We have discussed it a bit. This is nothing that's going to happen real quick.
I know.
Even if we were to do that, I mean, you're looking at a total restructuring of our rate structure because I got to make up that revenue somewhere. I cannot lose it. If they think that, oh, we've got it in our fund balance or our savings, that's wrong because we have depleted our savings to a point to where we've been dangerously close to losing our bond rating and some other significant tests. So if we were to do that, then it's got to be made up somewhere. So that means raising the rates for the other citizens. I will report back to the council with something. I don't have a timetable for it. I don't, not that it's not important, but I've got a lot on our plate. And if we were to probably reconsider doing something like that, we'd probably be dealing with it at the same time we're considering the rates.
Okay, got one other little thing that you might just, click on your computer and go into flat rates in water bills and see that most of the state of California, and it's quite a large state, is on flat rates. A lot of it is. So, kind of.
We are pursuing that, and we've had trouble.
And if they can get away with that.
Well, we've had trouble confirming that. So I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying we've had difficulty confirming that.
I will even show you the website to get onto.
If you want to email me some links, love to see them.
I sure will. Thank you.
I notice Councilmember Lanford has his light on, and I need to ask a question of the attorney before we do that. Since council cannot, where did our attorney go?
Mr. Langford, if they decide not to talk to me tonight, I'll talk to you out in the hallway. Thank you.
Well, since council cannot discuss or debate any issue brought forth at this time, I need, Councilmember Lanford had his light on while Ms. Conley was speaking, and my question is, since council cannot discuss or debate any issue brought forth at this time, what can Mr. Lanford say or do that falls within the parameter of what's legal?
Since it was not a posted agenda item, I would request that the council not engage in any discussion with the speaker, other than we do have a right to state what our policy is on something that's already been adopted, or make a motion to place an item for action on the next agenda.
Does what you wanted to do fall within that?
I just wanted to, actually, she answered it, because I was just gonna ask her for some clarification about where the information came from.
Okay. Have you got what you needed? Okay, I just wanted to be sure we don't get in trouble. I feel like with,
And
okay.
Mayor, I might clarify, this is not Haltom City's policy. This is the Attorney General's ruling that we cannot engage in discussions on matters that are not posted on the agenda. We're not allowed to do that without violating the Open Meetings Act. So unfortunately, the Open Meetings Act is mostly favorable to the public in that it gives them notice of what we're going to talk about. But if something hasn't been noticed to be talked about, we can't talk about it.
With the person who presents it or with each other?
Exactly.
Okay. So that's what I want to do, just for us to be cautious. Okay, we move now to resignations of board members. Do we have any for the?
We got another citizen wanting to talk.
Without, yes, you are correct, Mr. Eklund, without. All right, let me read.
Don't worry, Mr. Mayor, I'll keep you straight, okay?
All right, 6 minutes granted without prior notification, and with prior notification, and 3 without. So, Mr. Eklund, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Ray Eklund. I live at 2532 Oakwood Terrace. There's 2 things I'd like the council to consider. One is the very importance of public notification. I've never been particularly fond of the 200-foot rule. I'm glad to hear there's a 300-foot rule. I wasn't aware that there's so many different levels, and it's something I need to learn more about, maybe the council as well. But it's really important that we are able to communicate back and forth from the officials to the citizens and the general public. So we have an idea of what's going on. And this thing tonight with the church and the beer sales might be a fine example of places where we can get into trouble. An area of particular concern of mine related to public hearings and good public content of meetings is the Economic Development Corporation meeting, which is a quasi-governmental thing and it has a very large budget. The last public meeting was held at the fire station. The notice was published, if I'm not incorrect, on Saturday here at City Hall after the afternoon. Not really a very public thing, notice. And then the meeting was held, I believe, on Tuesday night. So it met the legal obligations of 72 hours. I think we can do better than that. I think the EDC is such an important part of our city. Economic development in the city, every council member, every candidate for council said that economic development was important to them and to their seats here. And the fact that we don't schedule a regular meeting for this very important part of our city, I don't think is in our best interest. I think with our new year, I always like to set new goals for the new year, and I try to sit down and do my budget. I believe that the EDC, their current policy is, well, we don't meet until we got something to meet about, and then we meet. You can't convince me that our economic development is so well taken care of that you don't have anything to meet about once a month in this city. So I would like to see the 4 council members that sit on the EDC and the other members to put their heads together and see if we can't come down to say we're going to meet on the such and such day every month, put it on the regular council agenda, on the regular website, and every place so we can start meeting. And in that meeting, I would like to encourage what we have here is an opportunity for the citizens to stand up, I can't do that, and address the EDC with their concerns and ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Eklund. Mr. Watkins? And you know the 3-minute rule also.
Yes, Bob Watkins, 6140 Blue Spruce Circle. I've almost filled this out for the last month or so, addressing this very thing, this 3-minute. It should be read off along with everything else. What comes to mind is Ms. Witt came in here. We're starting the council meeting so early. We start the pre-council meeting so early because y'all don't want to stay up or whatever the reason is. But business people, a lot of people hadn't got time to get here. Ms. Witt sat back there with the form filled out here a meeting before last, I think. And you didn't read the part about the 3 minutes, so that she wasn't aware of that, and there's people, I know we don't want to listen to Trey Fowler talk all the time, but Trey comes in a lot of time late. If you don't get here, or if you're sitting here and something comes up that you didn't think of, you should have the ability to get up and address it at least on a minimum basis, so that you could bring it back next time. But it needs to be announced that they have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. Okay. Resignations of board members. Do we have any? Appointments or reappointments? Attendance requirements, not a consideration. There is no executive session scheduled, therefore this council stands adjourned.